Okay. Well, good morning, good afternoon, maybe now. Okay, maybe we're actually live now. Right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to my medieval sewing party live stream. I am the Creative Contessa, and today is Repair Day. I have so many little things about my 15th century kit that need repair, and so we'll be doing that together while I address a variety of comments that I've been receiving under my videos. I'll be addressing comments that provided good information. I'll be addressing comments that were misinformed. So of course, the first thing we do is get dressed together. So I will be dressing myself in my 15th century Franco-Burgundian styles today. So the very first thing I'm going to do, as always, is put on, well, what I'm going to do for you all is put on my kirtle, because I don't want to be permabanned by Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube for starting in too undressed a state. So I'm wearing a smock. It was pronounced smoke in 15th century English, or smock in 15th century English. It's called a chemise in 15th century French. It's called a lena in medieval Irish. It's called a camicia in Italian. It was called a camisa in Spanish in the 15th century, a variety of pronunciations depending on where you are on the Iberian Peninsula, or a hempt in German. And this is the linen underlayer par excellence, the layer that should sit against your skin, that will provide evaporative cooling, that will absorb the oils from your skin and keep them from staining your overgarments. Linen is also antimicrobial, and so it will actually help prevent things like body odor from developing from bacterial buildup. Hi, Susan. Yeah, everyone needs a repair day, right? And I need repair days like once a month, probably. I am hard on my garments, as many of us know, many of you know, as I know, and as my garments know. And so they do require regular repairs. I am putting over top of my smock a kirtle, and as it was known in at least 20 different spellings and a variety of pronunciations in 15th century English. The same word applies in Scots, a kirtele, and it is called a cotte or a cotte simple in French. It was referred to as a gamora in northern Italy. Also another word you might sometimes see in Italy, vestito, sometimes you'll see. So this is an interim layer. This layer that you're seeing me put lace up now is still technically underwear based on 15th century mores. It is an interim sort of underwear, though. This is basically, as I've said often, this is basically the Lululemon yoga pants of the 15th century for noble women and for aristocrats, for patrician women, for members of the upper echelons of society. I would not go outside dressed just like this unless I were cosplaying a peasant or cosplaying a craftswoman, right? As a noble woman, as a contessa, as a comtesse, I would definitely not go out wearing just this unless the apocalypse were nigh and times were dire and the social norms simply didn't apply anymore. But I'm not going out. I'm inviting you into my private apartments so that we can have this lovely sewing party together, so that we can chat, so that we can learn from each other, and we can share our creative adventures together. So I'm not going out, you're coming to me. And so I'm therefore staying casual. But I have noticed something, that if I add serious bling to this outfit, it pleases the master algorithm oh so much more. So I'm going to be blinging up today in a way that to which some reenactors actually object, and I'll explain that when we get there. But right now I'm just lacing up my kirtle. As you see, it does not take long to do this at all. So this is before there were before there were zippers, before there were snaps. This is how garments, one of the ways in which garments were closed. Buttons were a fancier way in which garments were closed, but in Western Europe, buttons as garment closures don't make an appearance until the 14th century. Before that, buttons were just decorative bits and bobs sewn onto the surface of the fabric, but they weren't a closure in Western Europe. But in the 14th century, as clothes start tightening again, someone gets the bright idea that you can make a slit on one side of your fabric and push the button through it. I haven't actually traced the origins of the buttons back before that, so I'm not certain. I actually suspect That buttons probably come from the Middle East, come from the Levant, that they probably come from Persia or India or someplace like that. I haven't actually traced that back though. As a closure, buttons as a closure, not just buttons as a decorative bit or bob, right? Kevin, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Yeah. So is anyone going to be working on anything today, or am I alone in the projecting? I'm actually preparing today. Oh dear, there's something on my hair tie. Today we will be packing. We are heading to the Kingdom of Siam. And some of you may be familiar with that place as Thailand. So we are heading to Thailand. We are going to be traveling to the north, to the highlands, to the Lana Kingdom, where we will be visiting the great city of Chiang Mai. We are staying in a hotel that, for all intents and purposes, looks like a traditional Lana structure had a child, an illicit love child, with a Renaissance, 16th century Renaissance palace. It's pretty crazy. If you're interested in our travels, then you should check out my Travels with the Creative Contessa channel, subscribe and click the notification bell, because we're going to be doing a lot of live streaming from Thailand over the next 10 days.
Yeah. Postgrades just figured out that you have a travel channel.
I've been saying, I don't know how, I say pretty regularly in every medieval live stream that I have a travel channel. Getting dressed back then is a lot of work. It isn't, honestly. I mean, it's just different, right? I think the thing we have to remember about getting dressed in pre-modern times is that life was slower, full stop. We live now at such a crazy high pace of existence that we are stressing ourselves into depression and anxiety and health problems. But before the latest industrial revolution, before the factories powered by steam engines and later electricity, people lived a slower pace of life. Everyone did. Peasants did, workers did, craftsmen did, servants did. People actually had much more time off.
How many holidays?
There were dozens of holidays every year that were mandatory days off because they were holy days, feast days on the calendar. So, the pace at which we live now is really not natural, and it's making us literally crazy as a species. So it didn't matter that getting dressed took longer, because everything took longer, and we just accepted that and lived a slower life. Now, God knows, I know I even sometimes have to break my schedule down by the half hour. I know people who break their daily schedule down into 10-minute increments, and that's insane. So yes, getting dressed took longer, but it really isn't hard. It just takes a little more time. It's not really hard. And honestly, because of the way women, especially these days, Western women, are often expected to do their hair and makeup, if you compare that to how long it takes to do hair and makeup in the Middle Ages or Renaissance, there's no comparison. It's a way more involved process with modern makeup, modern cosmetics and hairstyling than it is to just put your hair in some braids and put a kerchief over it like I'm about to do. So I braided my hair. I'm now going to do what I call the dirty bun, the quick and dirty, very conjectural bun, where I just take those braids and tie them in half and half and half again until I create a very messy bun, because I don't care how that looks, because I'm going to don a kerchief over top of it like this. Right. So yeah, it's way easier to do my hair for the 15th century than it is to actually do a nice, proper, coiffed style that is expected in professional settings these days, for instance. Yeah. Let me see, question. Okay. How comfortable is the medieval clothing that I'm currently wearing and putting on? What I'm wearing now is so comfortable that I don't change out of it after I finish this live stream. Yeah, so Jim, that's a good question. How comfortable is this kirtle, is the smock, is the kerchief? Super comfortable. You know why? Because this is made for my body. I made this myself. I made the pattern for it. I fitted it to my person, right? So it is made for my body. It is made for my shape. It is not made for the weird shape that doesn't actually exist of standard modern sizings, right? Modern clothes never fit me correctly, ever. They're too short in the waist because I have a long waist. So everything looks like it's high-waisted on me. If it's small enough in the waist, then it's too tight in the chest and the shoulders. If it's big enough in the shoulders and chest, then it's if it's big enough in the shoulders and chest, then it's too big in the waist. Pants, forget it. With my waist size relative to my hips, again, if the pants fit me in the hips, they're way too big in the waist. If it fits me in the waist, it's way too big in the hips. So this is super comfortable and it just fits to my body. It's not tight or restrictive. I can move entirely. I can do all kinds of activities, right? Nothing. I'm not restrained in any way. So, and it's wool, so it breathes, and it's linen, so it breathes. So it's comfortable in pretty much all temperatures. And the kerchief is great. In the summer, in the heat, it keeps the sun off of my head and helps me keep cool. And the evaporative cooling, if I sweat, evaporative cooling helps cool me off. In the winter, as I've found by wearing it outside, this is warm. This is enough to actually keep me warm out there in the cold, wintry days of South Korea. So yeah, super comfortable. Great question. Let's see. I've got 2.5 pounds of very pretty beef hind shank that I'm about to smoke. Oh, shellback bow. That sounds so delicious. Okay, so I'm now going to don a bit of bling because I believe that women have not changed, that humans have not changed, and that even if we're dressed casually, we still sometimes want to add just a little bit of extra, something a little bit more. It's the 15th century equivalent of dressing up your jeans, right? You might wear a pair of jeans that are really nice, but they're just jeans. But then when you add a stunning piece of jewelry, suddenly it elevates those jeans to the next level. So if I'm inviting my courtiers into my private apartments for some sort of maybe story time, or maybe some of us ladies, my damsels, we're going to work on some kind of handcraft, right? Then, I might want to put on a piece that makes certain that everyone knows who is the highest ranking in the room, right? And it's not that this piece of jewelry, this collar, this is a replica. Some of you have asked me about this. This is a replica of a collar owned and worn by Maria Portinari. She was born a Baroncelli. She's a Florentine woman, patrician, who marries Tommaso Portinari. Tommaso is the Medici agent for their banking in Burgundy, in Bruges. And she becomes a damsel for Margaret of York, the Duchess of Burgundy, and he becomes one of the closest counselors and advisors of Charles the Bold. So very high ranking. They're very well placed in the Burgundian court. And she's depicted in both her engagement portrait by Hans Memling when I think she's about 20 wearing this. And then she's depicted about 10 years later in a Hugo van der Goes altarpiece that's in the Uffizi wearing this exact same color again. She also looks a lot older in the Hugo van der Goes, which could be a difference in Memling making the betrothal portrait look very much more perfect, and Hugo van der Goes going for just ultra realism because they're already married. So what does it matter, right? So that's why I'm putting on this collar. Also, I have a theory that the almighty algorithm will actually push this video more if I'm wearing this. I have a theory. We're gonna chase that down. Okay. Yeah, Eric Knudsen, thank you so much. This replica is by Armor and Castings, and you can buy it from their website. Most of my bling is medieval bling is Armor and Castings. They do historical jewelry replicas. And if you check out their site, armorandcastings.com, armor with a U, the British way, you can find a number of amazing pieces from ancient Rome through to the 17th century. They do lots of different replicas. And the code Contessa10 will get you an extra 10% off. Yep. Tea with Tash, welcome. Thank you for joining us. What were the metals used in the original piece? Okay, so we actually have not many. I wanted to talk about jewelry today, in fact. So that was going to be one of my topics anyway. So let me just go ahead and arrange myself for some sewing. But I'll go ahead and address this one specifically. So there's one collar that has survived that is like this one, of which I'm aware of. There's probably more than one. There's one specifically I'm aware of. It belonged to Michelle de France, who was a queen of France in the early 15th century. And hers is made out of, as far as I know, it's made out of solid gold, or it's made out of gold. How solid? I don't know. I don't remember what the count was. Whether it was 24 karat gold or what. These could be made of gold. They could be made of gilt silver. They could be made of gilt bronze. They could be made of not necessarily someone this nice, but they could also be made of pewter. And this one is actually, so this one actually has a metal core, and then individual pieces are hand painted with enamel when they come out of the mold. They're gilt, and then they're hand painted with enamel, and then they're fired again to set the enamel. So it's a combination of metal, gold leaf, and enamel. This is electroplated with gold. In the Middle Ages, gilding would have been done with gold leaf, not electroplating, at least not in Europe. There is some evidence that they may have had electroplating in the ancient world in the Middle East. If you've ever heard of the Baghdad battery, it was probably for electroplating things with gold, is the latest theory I heard, and it makes total sense, right? So that is how this made. It's got black pearls, right? And so all of these, each of these individual bits that you see, these are individually cast. There are, I don't know, there's probably 100 pieces in this that are cast manually. They have to carve the mold and then manually cast each piece, and then they have to clean up each piece after it comes out of the mold. There are little rough ends that need to be filed down. That's manual labor. This is not something you can really do by machine. So yeah, it's a big labor of love, a color like this. It weighs about a pound, which believe is more than you might think when it's sitting on your neck. But it's like when I first put it on, it's a little bit of a, oh, there's something heavy on my chest, and then I forget about it pretty quickly. Yeah. Do I have an idea of 15th century middle class jewelry? Yeah, absolutely. So depends on what you mean by middle class, right? So you have to remember that the middle class in the Middle Ages, just like now, covers a vast swath from the lower end of the medieval spectrum, or the middle class spectrum, to the upper end of the middle class spectrum. So, you know, even so-called middle class people could afford the occasional jewelry that was gold. We know this. We have wills that have survived from England and France and Italy from middle class people, so merchants, for instance, and I'm not talking super wealthy merchants, who would be kind of upper middle class now, and they've got gold rings. There's one will I read, and I did a short on this. I did a video on this. I did a whole video on medieval rings, by the way. If you're interested, you can check that video out. It's 15 minutes long, something like that. It's not terribly long, but full of good information. But this will basically bequeaths about 20 gold rings, plain gold rings, but gold rings made of old gold. So literally they had some old gold sitting around, maybe jewelry or candlesticks, who knows. And it was set aside specifically to be recast as rings for 20 friends and family, who were then to remember them by wearing these rings and pray for their souls in purgatory, to shorten the time in purgatory. But, you know, on the cheaper end, so I think rather than talking about class and what they would have or could have had, because, you know, the wheel of fortune in the Middle Ages turns, it's probably more useful to say how much things cost, or what would have been available for people with a lower income. So at the lower end, even people at the lower end of the spectrum had bling made of pewter. Pewter was the cheap and easy to work metal. Pewter casters, there were plenty of pewter casters. They were separate from gold. They were not goldsmiths, they were pewtersmiths, right? And they basically all the things that you can basically do in gold or silver or bronze or brass, you can do in pewter. And so there were badges and rings that were made of pewter. There were belt buckles and belt fittings that were made of pewter. We even have some bridal coronets made of pewter. Bridal coronets in England specifically. I'm not certain if it was a tradition in other parts of Europe, but in medieval England, when the bride, even a peasant, a lower class, a woman on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, they had this thing called a bridal coronet, and you would actually wear it on your wedding day. And we have actually, there's an extant one that I saw that was found that's made of pewter. So yeah, basically it seems that all the same shapes were available in the different precious metals. At the lower end of the spectrum, you would have pewter, and as you work your way up the spectrum, you go pewter, and I don't know if pewter, then bronze, then gilt bronze, then silver, then gilt silver, then gold, basically. And this is actually borne out. The Duke of Burgundy, when he would go on pilgrimage, Charles the Bold specifically, I'm thinking of, and we have records of this, he would go on pilgrimage to a variety of places, and he would actually buy pilgrim's badges for his entire household. So a lot of pilgrim's badges. And he would buy different calibers of pilgrim's badges based on their rank, on their place within his household, but also within the social hierarchy. So he bought a whole bunch of badges in pewter. And then he bought some that were bronze, and then he bought some that were silver, and then he bought some that were silver gilt, and then he brought some gold ones. So yeah, it was it seems that everyone wanted a little bit of bling, and that with the exception of probably beggars and the truly desperately poor, everyone did at least have some little piece of bling. Yeah, it's a great question. Let me see. Baghdad battery has been debunked. They found additional broken objects and the old scripts of blessings that were pasted in or under the foundation. Well, that would be new information that I haven't video deep dive on it. That is new information. I'll admit I haven't looked into the Baghdad battery in like a long time. But wait, been debunked in what way? Oh, that it wasn't a battery at all? I mean, that could be. Tin was actually relatively expensive. Yeah, but pewter wasn't because lead was not. So was lead in the old pewter a big issue? Yes. Actually, that is lead in pewter was it could be an issue depending on, especially in pewter, right? So was lead an issue in the pewter when it was on your skin? I'm not certain. I haven't not actually read any studies that talk about morbidity caused by lead in pewter jewelry. Perhaps the percentage of lead was low enough and people weren't necessarily wearing these pieces all the time. Like they probably weren't wearing them when they were working. Craftsmen were probably not wearing rings on their fingers while they were doing manual, while they're weaving and casting and smithing and working in the fields, right? So maybe they're not wearing them all the time, and so their exposure isn't as high. I do know that lead in pewterware, which was used for plates, was problematic, but they actually were aware of this even though they didn't understand why, because in certain books of etiquette, they talk about not serving acidic dishes on pewterware. So, or on metal in general, unless it's gilt in gold or silver, right? So they acknowledged that there was something that happened between acidic foods and certain kinds of metal that resulted in very undesirable outcomes. And that's actually why apparently tomatoes were thought to be poisonous at first. There's a couple of reasons tomatoes, when they were brought over, were thought to be poisonous. One is they looked a lot like the mandrake fruit, apparently, and that is poisonous. So people just sort of said, yeah, a lot of people looked at that and said, not worth it, not going to try it. Another problem is that apparently some people did initially try to eat tomatoes and they served them on the pewter dishes. The acid in the tomato leached out the lead and a lot of the lead, and the people who ate the tomatoes then died. So there's a couple of different reasons why tomatoes were mistakenly thought to be themselves poisonous. And that's why, even though, the Columbian Exchange, there are records of tomatoes in the Old World in the 16th century, but apparently they were only used as ornamental because they're beautiful if you think about it. And especially if you look at the kinds of tomatoes that were being brought over from Mesoamerica in the 16th century, they were really beautiful. They were pretty. So they would actually have tomato plants and they were ornamental. So they would use them as decoration, kind of like those little weird chili plants that people use as ornamental chili plants now. Let me see. Okay. Yep. You all may find this surprising, but I don't necessarily have a lot of time to consume other people's content. I'm too busy doing a lot of research in like primary sources. So yeah, there's a few things I put on when I'm cooking that I listen to, but I'm very picky about the kind of content I consume, and I tend to focus more on like BBC documentaries or lectures by historians. I listen to a lot of lecture recordings in general. I listen to a lot of podcasts with professors and archaeologists discussing their latest research. Yeah, everyone always asks me, have you seen this video by one of your fellow creators? And I'm like, I don't have time. I'm sorry. I just don't. Especially with all the different channels that I've got going on. Okay. Going to see if I can make, I hate it when it does that. Why does it do that? Okay. Yep. So I am currently, there was a question about jewelry, and I did just explore some of that. Someone actually popped in the comments asking for a video about jewelry, and I have done a video about medieval rings. I have said before, and I'll say this again, I'm getting away from the long format video essays because YouTube doesn't push them at all on my channel. It doesn't. If you look at the views on my long format videos, they don't earn me any money, and they take 100 hours to make when it comes to the research and the scripting and the filming and the editing. So it's just not worth it. As sad as that makes me, YouTube does not value that kind of content on my channel. So I will probably not be making a long format video on jewelry, but I'm happy to talk about what I know about it in the live stream here. And there's a couple of things that we have to understand about medieval jewelry is that not much of it relative to how much there was has survived, because recycling and upcycling is a severely medieval concept. And so while we have, people wanted always the latest, often the latest and greatest in fashion, and this sense of tradition of, well, this coronet has been around since, since my great grandfather's days. No. There was very little reverence in that regard for objects like this, decorative objects. And so every couple of generations, jewelry like this would be taken apart, melted down, and redesigned and reset. So it's very hard to find extant medieval jewelry relative to how much there was. Sometimes we get lucky and we find a stash somewhere, a hoard. Recently, this happened in Poland 6 or 7 months ago. They found a whole stash of Polish royal jewels from the Middle Ages. It had been stashed away in the early 16th century in this church and been forgotten about. And so because of that, we actually now have examples of medieval Polish royal jewelry. But otherwise, those things, they get recycled. They get turned into something else because it's easy to melt metal down, take the gems out. They can be reset. They can be refaceted. They can be turned into something else. Now, what we do have in spades that still gives us an idea of how things looked very frequently, we have expense accounts that actually detail the purchases of jewelry, and they will often actually then specify the shape of the item. Just make sure that's straight. They will detail, therefore, the shape of the item. They'll talk about the jewels that are going into it, the kind of metals out of which it's going to be made. And then we also have wills. Wills and death inventories are always such a great source of information about daily life, because death inventories in particular go through a person's home after they've died, and they inventory everything that has value. So it's everything from great to small. If it is assessed to have some sort of value, it's included in the death inventory. And so that is really a very objective look into what people owned. And death inventories were done across all levels of society. It wasn't just something that, it wasn't just a practice by members of the upper crust. So what that means is we have a lot of death inventories that will detail belts and belt fittings and the kinds of materials out of things are made. They'll talk about pendants, they'll talk about pouches, they'll talk about collars, they'll talk about necklaces, and of course, anything that was precious metal. So depending on where you were on the socioeconomic spectrum, that could include things like chalices and whatnot. Very fine plate, as it was called, meaning any kind of plates, platters, tableware that are made out of fine metals, chalices, serving vessels, ewers, pitchers. So yeah, you can actually get an idea of what people had versus what has survived by going through these death inventories and wills as well talk about the items that they own that are to be bequeathed to someone else. So, we can get a good idea of what there was, even if it no longer is, thankfully. And in some cases, and this is really interesting, in some cases, the gems, actual real gems that that members of the upper crust owned, end up being included in illuminations if they commission a book of hours, or a copy of the Bible, or a compilation of stories. Sometimes, if the illuminator if sometimes they either commissioned depictions of their gems to be included in the marginalia, or if the illuminator just knew them well and would just include them, especially if they had particularly famous gems. And the Italian condottieri were famous in the 15th century for giving their gems names. And by gems, I don't mean a diamond. I mean gems like the full setting metal with precious stones in it. So, yeah. Melt down and make something new to sell. Medieval craftspeople would get along with the Louvre thieves. Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, the reality is that, modernly we now have this deep respect in the West for, well, some of us anyway, have a deep respect for ancient objects. But in many cases, that's a more recent development. Exceptions there, of course, are if it's a relic with some kind of religious significance attached to it, if it's belonged to a saint or a martyr, or was something brought back from the Holy Land, right? That's different. But for the most part, things got crowns, coronets, they got melted down and turned into something else. Gems and jewels, the metals, fittings, they got melted down and turned into something else. So we just don't have that much relative to how much there was. But, it seems that humans all like bling. They find a way to peacock, whether, within their means, whatever their means were, they would find a way to peacock within that. And people were not as poor in the Middle Ages as our modern oligarch overlords would like us to think they were. And that's as close as I'm going to stray into modern politics. But seriously, the levels of poverty that most people associate with the Middle Ages are a post-industrial development. They are not a medieval institution. There just weren't those large numbers of impoverished people. The highest levels of poverty crop up after the Reformation, right? After they close all of the charitable institutions of the church in so many places that actually actively helped people get a foot up in society, whether they were orphans or foundlings or born to a poor family or whatever. Yeah. Let me see. For objects, yes, because production was so costly, it was just more cost effective to reuse than to make new. Oh yeah, 100%. So that's a good point about metalworking. Most modern people don't really have an appreciation for how complex it is to extract metal from rock. It is such a labor and resource intensive process. We only think about, oh, well, they didn't have electricity, so surely they just must have burnt some stuff to fuel the furnaces. Okay, but it takes a lot of charcoal in order to fuel those furnaces, and you have to make the charcoal, and you have to cut the trees down, right? To actually make fuel in the Middle Ages was itself a massive production. So to be able to actually smelt metal, dear God. Yeah, so absolutely. You would 100%. It would be way more effective to melt down extant pieces than it would to make fresh metal. Did they care about history, or was that not a concern? I know fashion cycles have always harkened back to previous trends coming back. Was that a thing as well? Previous trends coming back? That seems to be, until the 15th century, no. I haven't seen the previous trends things coming back so much. Not in Western Europe, anyway. What you do see is that in the 15th century, suddenly starting in Italy, especially with the new fascination with all of those ancient Roman statues and cameos, you start seeing women's clothing in the Italies, and their hairstyles start to reflect the kinds of hairstyles that you see in those ancient Roman statues. But that's maybe the first example I can actively think of, just off the top of my head, of that fashion coming back. Whether they had respect for medieval people, had a deep respect for history. Please don't misunderstand me. History was a major, very important subject in the Middle Ages. It was supposed to teach you morality. It was supposed to teach you how to act and behave based on the mistakes and the triumphs of people in the past, especially great man history. That's a medieval concept, 100%. Noble men were studied. There were books written all over the place about the deeds of Julius Caesar, the deeds of Alexander, right? And they were read frequently. I was just reading this morning that Charles V, King of France, part of his daily routine, according to Christine de Pizan, who biographed his life. That doesn't seem right. Is that a verb, to biograph? Who documented his life? What? Chronicled his life. Yeah, that's way better, to biograph. That is absolutely not a real word. Who chronicled his life, who composed a biography about Charles V, but she was actually, present in his court. So she actually said that one of the things he did every day, part of his daily routine, was about an hour he took for reading, where he would read about the deeds of the great men of history. Right? He would read about the Caesars, or he would read about past kings. So they respected history, from, not like us apparently, for the lessons that history could teach them to help them be a better ruler, to help them live a better life, to help them make better decisions. But that's not the same as respecting the objects of history. Now, there were some objects of history that were respected. It was less likely to be jewelry that would be treated with any kind of reverence just because Queen so-and-so had once owned it. Yeah. So yeah, history was absolutely important. But also history was not as scientific as it is now, in the least. History and legend in the medieval world are very closely intertwined. And a lot of modern misconceptions about history, some of them can be traced back to the medieval understanding of history or misconception of history, because history wasn't about studying history wasn't necessarily about being correct. As I said, it was about building a moral foundation for conduct, about learning from lessons of the past. And so there were a lot of stories that were passed off as history that were clearly crafted just to be parables, but still were attributed to some great man or another, so that they would be given more weight and credence in gleaning the lesson. Yeah. Let me see. Australia found a sunken ship full of beer from the 1800s. I mean, I think they've found remnants of beer, although I don't think it was still liquid, but they found vessels with traces of beer in them from ancient Egypt, from the pyramids. Also honey. They did find honey, not a trace of honey, but like at least one jar of honey, of which I know, from ancient Egypt, like 4,000-year-old jar of honey, which is pretty cool. Laurie, welcome. Lovely to see you. Yeah, let's see. Twitchy says, yep. History was considered vital to noble education. Monks spent hours writing down historical narratives and folklore from the people that lived around them in an effort to help those lessons. Yep. So yes, history was a very important subject, and it was very important to study, but it did not have the scientific underpinnings that the study of history does now. For instance, they were generally not working with primary source documents when they were studying the Caesars. That wasn't true. They were, yeah. So we've definitely come a long way in our study of history, but for that, I feel like maybe a general respect for history is much lower than it used to be, curiously. And I bet that honey was still edible. I actually remember, if I recall correctly, and it's been a while since I looked at this, I think they actually did a microbial test on it. And from a microbial standpoint, it would have been fine. There was nothing. There was nothing. It was just as from a microbial standpoint, just as nutritious and salubrious as it was when it was entombed in that tomb. Yeah, I mean, yes, I know honey itself is a preservative, absolutely. But, it could have gotten contaminated with some other thing that could have caused, there could have been fermentation, but there wasn't, apparently. And I don't remember in the article if one of the archaeologists had the guts to actually taste it or not. I would. If you told me it was fine, microbially speaking, I would totally taste it. Roman ships in the Mediterranean were found with vases that had remnants of wine, beer, honey, and some kind of oats, very close to Malta. Yep, there are a lot. The shipwrecks that they're finding all over the world, actually, that have remnants of what I would call consumables still pretty well preserved. That always amazes me, because then it really feels, metal is kind of cold. I don't feel as connected to people in the past if I touch a medieval metal, a historical metal object. But the second you're actually holding 2,000-year-old oats in your hand or smelling 2,000-year-old wine or beer, to me, that's a much more visceral and intimate connection to the past that actually makes me feel much more connected to those people than something cold and immutable. Well, immutable is not quite the right word, but cold and less impressionable than metal. Like wood takes me one step closer. When we find organic material like wood in the archaeological record, 2,000-year-old wooden shovel or a 2,000-year-old bucket, something that was used by people all the time. When those sorts of objects are excavated, to me, that feels like it's just even more, it's definitely more connected to the past than a metal equivalent would be. Oh, I see. Emma says, I wasn't specific. I was referring to their stance on the history of fashion and jewelry, like the way we hold. No. Oh, yeah, Emma. No, there was absolutely was. Did medieval people value vintage jewelry and clothing? No. Everything was upcycled. Everything was reused. Everything was used and reused until it disintegrated. Things that could be reshaped into other more appropriate objects for the current times were. Which is why we have so few garments from the Middle Ages relative to later eras. It's why we have so little jewelry from the Middle Ages relative to later eras, because there was no, as far as I can tell, no respect for vintage. What there was a respect for is that we have these materials, they are already crafted, we need clothes, we're going to turn it into clothes that will fit this other person now, or that are in the new style. And that can make the study of historical fashion a little tricky, because often the garments that have survived might date, the fabric, for instance, might carbon date to the 14th or 15th century. But the garment had been recrafted and reshaped and retailored over decades, sometimes up to 100 or 200 years. And so the shape of the garment doesn't reflect its actual date, the fabric's date of creation. So this, like, for instance, there's this garment that is erroneously referred to as the coat, sometimes spelled C-O-A-T, which is really erroneous, of Charles the Bold. And then people look at it and say, look, it's an example of an actual 15th century garment, and it is not. The fabric belonged to Charles the Bold. It was fabric that he had in his camp when he lost, and I don't remember if that fabric was looted at the Battle of Canson or the Battle of Nancy. But at one of those two battles, the Swiss mercenaries, he lost both of them, the Swiss mercenaries looted his camp and took that fabric with them back to Switzerland. That was in the 1470s. And then sometime in the 1520s, that fabric was turned into two separate items. That fabric was turned into an altar cloth, half part of it, and the other was turned into that coat, which is why it looks like a Waffenrock, because it is a Waffenrock. It is not a 1470s style garment, but the fabric dates to the 1470s. So yeah, they definitely did. I've not seen any evidence of people in Western Europe having any kind of reverence for jewelry or garments. Everything was used, everything was reused. Linen garments, they would be worn and recrafted and reshaped until they couldn't be used as garments anymore. And then they would be cut down and maybe made into pouches or bags or rags for washing or swaddling clothes. And then when that even started to disintegrate, then they would be turned into rag paper. Linen was used to make rag paper. Silk, would be often, or silk and wool would be also similar life cycle, except they didn't make silk paper in the Middle Ages, as far as I know. So that would then often end up being used to stuff a mattress or stuff pillows or become insulation in the walls. So no, they definitely had no such reverence. And I said jewelry, it was melted down and reshaped into whatever the latest and greatest in fashion was, because humans are peacocks and humans get bored. And so we're always looking for the next most interesting way to do something. We always want something new, right? It's just like when we're children, we get tired of the toy that we've been given after we play with it for a while, then we want a new toy. That's not a new concept. Emma says, I love seeing the ways garments were upcycled and retailored over time. The video Abby Cox has done showing the construction of 1800s garments are fascinating. Yeah, there is a garment that was, God, who was it? It's an 18th century garment, and it was 19th century garment. Sorry, that was belonged to, I'm pretty certain it was connected to the court of Victoria, but her early years, and it got remade and retweaked so many times that the way it is now is not the way it was when it was made. Yeah. Let me see. Did I miss a question? We are giants compared to medieval people, not like the knights or Templar types, but regular people. So Jim O'Connor, yeah, so it depends on where you are in Europe, how tall people were, and when you were in medieval Europe, because the 1,000 years of the Middle Ages is not a monolith. We have a lot of, yeah. Oh, tea. Guess I'm being told to drink tea. Whatever, man. We have a lot of skeletons that are very tall, especially from Scandinavia. And it's, depends, you can actually kind of tell how things are going in any given place based on the size of the skeletons. What we do know is that places that have a really heavily grain-based diet, their skeletons tend to be smaller, shorter. Places that have more meat, more protein, more dairy, their skeletons tend to be taller. And that's a nutritional truth and a biological truth. So yeah, it's all about nutrition. And that's why Italians, for instance, and Irish people in the 19th century get really small, especially in southern Italy, where southern Italy was extremely poor in the 19th century. I know this because I'm of those people. My grandfather was 100% Southern Italian from Cosenza. So yeah. But if you go down to southern Italy now, you see tall people wandering around everywhere because their nutrition is just so much better. Oh, wait, Lori, did I miss the Charles the Bold coat? Hold on a minute. Oh, wait, the red silk coat. Yes, Lori. So the Charles the Bold coat that I was just talking about. Yeah, the red silk coat, that did not belong to Charles the Bold. Never touched his body. That fabric, he may have never even touched that fabric. That was a length of fabric that was looted from his encampment, taken back to Switzerland, and then it sat in one of the church treasuries for God knows how long. Part of it got turned into an altar cover, and the other got turned into that garment. Never ever. It is not a 15th century garment, and that is one of the biggest lies that gets floated all over Pinterest. I think it was Kohler probably was the first person, that 19th century Victorian German fashion historian. I think he may have been the first one to call that the coat of Charles the Bold. For all I know, that might have been the sign that was on the garment in the church where it was displayed. I don't know, but the Abegg Stiftung, the Abegg Foundation, did a restoration of that garment a couple of decades ago at this point, where they very clearly state that the garment was not made in the time of Charles the Bold. It was made in the 1520s to reflect 1520 styles, or early 16th century styles anyway, and that they were just unfortunately, none of the way they restored it, unfortunately, was really crappy. None of the original seams survived. So, but it was not Charles the Bold. 1520s. Yeah, sad. Laurie is flabbergasted. Yeah, that's one of the biggest lies of the medieval costuming world, I feel, that goes around. And Pinterest is not helping with that myth. But yeah, tell everyone, It's not a Burgundian garment. We have no extant Burgundian garments of normal type, as far as I know, from the Burgundian court. None of them have survived. And you can also thank probably those French revolutionaries who very kindly burnt everything to the ground they could get their hands on in the late 18th century. I'm confident that a lot of things got sent up in smoke that were actually probably in chests somewhere waiting to be found again. Let me see. It really humanizes the average sewist of the past to be able to see the traces of garment construction and changes over time. Makes me feel better about my stitches not always being the neatest. Yeah, if you actually start looking at historical garments, which I have been doing a lot of here in Korea. I'm going to be going again actually in March to go and examine some 16th century royal garments up at the Folk Museum, or noblewomen's garments. But what I'm seeing is that stitches are absolutely not perfect historically. They vary in size, even in the same line of stitching. Everything is not perfectly 2 millimeters spaced. That very often repairs were effected to be maximally practical and strong, and less of a concern was given to how it looked. Not that no care was given to how it looked, just less, right? Yeah, and even if you look at embroidery, there is a range of skill set across history, Middle Ages too. You can tell there were different levels of sewists, and they were all sewing nevertheless. They were all producing. There were different levels of embroiderers, and they were all still producing. I have seen embroidery from the 15th century that looks like God painted it with his eyes, right? And then I've seen embroidery from the 15th century that looked like a 4-year-old did it. No insult to 4-year-olds. So, yeah. Oh, thank you, Jay Banger. Really appreciate that. Tamu French Revolution. Yeah, the French Revolution sucked big time. My great grandfather O'Neill, you came here from Ireland, stood 5'3". Yep. See, Jim, exactly. Did he come? Great grandfather? When did he come? You can't. Yeah. When did he come? I can't imagine he came during the potato famine, but still. Question. Let me see. Do you have a favorite historical garment? A favorite historical garment? Oh, goodness. If you mean a garment that actually exists, that's a good question. I would say some of my favorite historical garments are not entire garments anymore, but they're my favorite because of what they show us about medieval tailoring and the sophistication of medieval tailoring. One of my favorite extant medieval garments is the coat, but it should be C-O-T-E, not C-O-A-T, of Charles de Blois. Charles de Blois, this is a beautiful fitted, padded cote hardy, and it has the most sophisticated grande assiette sleeves you can imagine, and it fits fit his body perfectly, and actually shaped it a little bit, gave it that chalice-waisted, pigeon-breasted look. And the way the sleeves are so sophisticated, the armscye is so sophisticated that the wearer can, because I've made several reconstructions of this, so the wearer can lift their arms up straight up. See how even on this dress, my dress lifts up a little bit if I do that. Not a lot, but a little. On this coat, C-O-T-E, if the wearer lifts their arm up, they have full range of motion and not a single thing shifts. That's how sophisticated this armscye is. And it's very clever because in the front, it has no waist seam, but in the back, it has a waist seam because it acknowledges that the curve of the back on a fit man who actually has a waist is going to end up with a wrinkle in the back here, probably, if you don't actually put a seam in there. So it's a beautiful garment, so sophisticated. I admire it greatly. Another of my favorite garments from the 15th century are a series, I think it's 2 or 3 linings from a bodice from Schloss Langberg, Burg Langberg in Austria. And what I love about these is, again, even though it's just the linings of these, I think it was a little girl and a woman, full-grown woman's gowns, it shows, again, this crazy, sophisticated, strange, teardrop-shaped armscye that when it opens up, it actually ends up taking advantage of the bias effect of the grain in the fabric, and it naturally folds these amazing organ pleats. So there's no need. It shows us how they didn't have to do any kind of weird pleating or insert of fabric to create these organ pleats. They just were so clever that they figured out how to use the bias, the natural bias effect, the bias stretch, and the shaping from the way the fabric lays if you drape it across the bias instead of on the grain. Right. So now that mystery was solved, how all those women in those 15th century woodcuts, especially from the second half of the 15th century, it's fitted up here and it's kind of fitted on the sides and it's fitted in the back, but in the front, it's got these organ shaped pleats that are just so beautiful and full. So yeah, some of my favorite historical garments don't look that good anymore. But I love them because about what they tell us about the construction, the sophistication of the construction techniques that were used, and that mostly, as far as I can tell, have been forgotten. Now, there were, of course, in the 20s, there was a fascination with bias cut again. And so a lot of, Erte and a lot of those really avant-garde designers actually started taking advantage of the bias again to create really interesting draping and shaping. But it took how long to get from the 15th century to there? Yeah. So I think those are some of my favorite. And then of course there's the same thing. I really love the farsetto of Diego di Cavagnalia. I have a couple of videos on his farsetto, his doublet, as we would call it in the modern costuming world, right? Because again, it's got all these sophisticated, clever adaptations that are made. For instance, the farsetto is the doublet in the 15th century that men wear everywhere in Western Europe, everywhere, and Bohemia as well. Right, that's Central Europe, I guess. So it's fitted in the body. It has either a fitted sleeve or a puffy sleeve or a puffy sleeve into a lower fitted sleeve. It closes in the front with laces or buttons, and it always looks like it has a skirt in the second half of the 15th century, right? So you end up with this kind of peplos here to which hosen and leg armor would attach. But on Diego di Cavagnilia's farsetto, it's very clever because it looks like it has a skirt all the way around. There's a waist seam going all the way around. But the waist seam in the front is fake. It's a faux seam because it's literally just a tuck that's taken in the fabric to create the appearance of a waist seam and the effect of a waist seam. But it means that you still have the full strength of the fabric from his shoulders down to the bottom of the peplos. And why is that important? Because in the 15th century, men were suspending their leg harness, their leg armor from these doublets, right? And so he would be attached from the front, not from the back. And so all of that, putting that waist seam there means that instead of the weight of the leg harness going all the way up to the shoulders, it's actually put here on the waist and on the pelvis. But also that means that it's not a real seam. So the leg harness can't rip out the seam. You still have the strength of the fabric there rather than a seam, which would be a point of weakness. So yeah, I do have a couple of favorite historical garments. On the Korean side, there's just some amazing, stunningly beautiful things that have survived here. So much better than in Europe, actually. The preservation of garments here is a little mind-boggling. We have these gorgeous skirts that the women in the 16th century in Korea were wearing, where they've got these really sexy tucks in the front that actually raise the front of the skirt so that it goes only just to the ground, to the tops of your feet. But then in the back, you have this beautiful train. And that tuck I just find it so alluring because it kind of falls down into the sides of the skirt. And so it looks a lot like actually the way Victorians were wearing a lot of their layers of skirts in the second half of the later part of the 19th century. Right. And, the techniques that the Koreans were using in the 16th century to make their garments are so sophisticated. They were doing linings, and then they were putting facing on the bottom of the skirt so that the bottoms of the skirt, the facing would wear away and not the skirt itself. Yeah, I do have some favorite garments, I guess. But none of them look very pretty now. Most of them don't look very pretty now. Most of them look a little rough now. But like an archaeologist who can look at a piece of wood that was once a bucket and envisage the whole bucket, I can look at these fragments of garments and imagine what they looked like in the prime of their lives, as it were. Yeah. Oh goodness, lots of comments there. Oh, Gully, thank you so much. Question: I'm new. Can you tell me a bit about mural in the background? Yes. Also, have you heard of the tapestries called the Unicorn in Captivity? Also, yes. Handsome, can you bring me my scarf? Are you there, handsome? Did you leave me? I actually have a replica of the unicorn in captivity. Okay, so tapestries. So this is a tapestry. It is a replica of, let's see if I can bring it closer. It is a replica of the a series of 6 tapestries that are called The Lady and the Unicorn, because we have the lady and the unicorn in all of them, right? So there's a lady and there is a unicorn. Actually, there are 2 ladies. I think there are 2 ladies and a unicorn in all of them, but each 5 of them, one of each of the 5 are an allegory for the 5 senses. This is the organ. This is a portative organ. So you can see it's literally portable. And her damsel is actually operating the billows back here, right? See that? And she is just gently tinkering here on the front, and the sound comes out here. This is a beautiful instrument. And this, therefore, is an allegory for the sense of hearing. And the 6th one is actually called Désir. It actually says it on the top, Je vous désire, right? These are in the Musée du Cluny in Paris. There's a special room just for these tapestries that they built just for them. So you can go and visit them if you're in Paris. When I was studying in Paris, I would go to the Cluny at least once a week and just sit with these tapestries. You can buy these replicas on eBay. This one is probably 60 or 70 years old. This one is silk screened on a tapestry weave. So the fabric, the ground fabric, is woven in a tapestry weave. It's actually a weave. And then it was the pattern was silk screened by hand, basically painted by hand on top of it. I also do have proper replica tapestries where it's actually the pattern is woven. And the Unicorn in Captivity is one of my favorite series of tapestries ever, because when I was a little girl growing up in Delaware, the United States, we would often go to the cloisters up in New York. That is part of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was built by Carnegie, basically. He took parts of monasteries, monastic communities, monastic structures from France, purchased them. He didn't steal them. And he shipped them to Yonkers, New York, and assembled them together into one and filled them in where they needed to be filled in, into basically a medieval monastery like building on the bluff in Yonkers overlooking the Hudson River. So the Unicorn in Captivity series is at the cloisters, and I used to go and visit that pretty frequently too. I haven't been back to the cloisters since 2021. But the Unicorn in Captivity is an allegory for the Passion of the Christ, and the unicorn is an allegory for Christ himself. Very often in a lot of these tapestries, not the tapestries, in a lot of medieval imagery, if you see a unicorn and a lady, the unicorn is representing Christ there, and the lady, of course, the Virgin, is the Virgin Mary. So that's later medieval, though. The unicorn is a much more violent animal in the earlier Middle Ages. But the Unicorn in Captivity is a fantastic, or the Unicorn in Captivity is part of the series of The Hunt of the Unicorn, which is an allegory for the Passion of the Christ. And if my condottiero hadn't abandoned me, I could have him bring I have a replica. I have a silk scarf, actually, a giant silk scarf that is a replica of the Unicorn in Captivity. It's a very moving scene to me, because it's this unicorn sitting in this millefleur background, greenery all around with hundreds of flowers, many, many different kinds of flowers, very accurately depicted. And there's a tiny enclosure, and the unicorn is chained to a tree. And he, of course, has the wounds of Christ on him, and he's sitting there. He's got a collar on, and he's bleeding. So it's a very, very emotional tapestry series. Let me see. Okay. So yeah, thank you for that. Oh, man, let me pop that comment up there. Thank you so much for that. That's pretty fantastic. I should have put that up there. I'm sorry. I'm still figuring some of this stuff out. Darn it. Oh no, come back. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Gully. Really appreciate that. How often, and Gully, Any other questions follow up to that? Let me know. How often would a woman in the period of clothing you're wearing wear their hair down? Or is that more of a pre-Raphaelite Victorian misconception? Great question. ASMR library official, thank you for that, because I was actually today, I had prepared to actually address a bunch of the misconceptions that I keep seeing repeated in the comments under my videos. This wasn't actually going to be one of them, but I'll address it anyway. So I'm going to start with the preface that medieval Europe, it's a whole continent-ish, depending on how you define continents. It's 1,000 years of history, depending on how you define the Middle Ages, but either way, it's a long period of time. And neither is Europe a monolith now, nor was Europe a monolith then, nor is 1,000 years a monolith of time, right? So things change everywhere. For the most part, though, in Western Europe, women did not wear their hair down. And there's this thing about, well, young women were allowed to wear their hair down. Okay, but no. They didn't wear their hair down anyway because it's inconvenient to wear your hair down. Women didn't cut their hair in this era. And before the modern era, women didn't really cut their hair in Western Europe. They didn't cut it unless they had some kind of horrible disease and it was found necessary to shave their heads, or they were entering a nunnery. Depending on your order, you might be expected to cut your hair or even shave your head, depending on the order and the era. But for the most part, women didn't cut their hair, which meant they had super duper duper long hair for the women who could manage that. I can't. My hair only grows to here. This is it. Maximum length for me is to my waist and not very thick. But other women can grow it longer. But what that means is you're not going to just walk around doing lots of physical labor, leading a busy, active life with your hair down, because it's going to get knotted. It's going to be hard to keep clean because in the medieval world, in most places in Western Europe, they didn't even have chimneys. So they didn't have a nice chimney, not a nice chimney piece that would funnel the smoke up and out of the room. No, there was a hole in the ceiling and the smoke just filled the whole space, which meant there was soot floating around everywhere, which meant your hair was just going to get really dirty and nasty. It's going to be dirty. It was going to get knotty. No one wanted that. Medieval people liked being clean. So even young women would braid their hair and not necessarily cover it, but probably they would cover their heads because it will help them keep warm when it's cold, and when they're out in the sun working, it will help them keep cool when it's hot. So yeah, that's a pre-Raphaelite thing, showing women with their hair down all the time. In the Middle Ages, for the most part, if especially an adult woman had her hair down, either she was in a stage of mourning. We actually have depictions of women in mourning, like serious mourning. I mean, like they're kneeling and scratching their eyes out kind of thing. Their hair is down. That's not a sign of a good situation, though. That's not how you would just wear your hair. That's how you wear your hair when you're, actively keening for someone because someone has died whom you love, like a child, like your husband, right? So for the most part, no. Women did not wear their hair down, not even young women, not even unmarried women. They just didn't walk around with it down all the time. Now, of course, we have depictions of women who are supposed to represent a virginal woman who are therefore shown with their hair down because there was an association between wearing your hair down and being a virginal unmarried girl. But that's symbolic and that's representative. That's trying to tell the viewer, trying to communicate something to the viewer, because brides frequently would actually in a wedding ceremony, especially in the later Middle Ages, would actually wear their hair down to the ceremony, showing that they were, a young virginal type woman or a virginal type woman. But that wasn't how they would just wear their hair all the time. It's just not practical. It really isn't. And especially if you have really long hair, it's going to get stuck in everything. And oh, by the way, how do you light your homes? Fire. So there's rush lights, there are possibly candles, there are torches. You're not going to want your hair just floating about. It's a bad plan. It's a really bad plan. So no, unfortunately, that's a pre-Raphaelite thing and a Hollywood thing. One of the things that drives me crazy in movies that set in the Middle Ages is when I see women walking around with their hair down and there's not something wrong with those women. For example, you will ask me what I thought of Hamnet. Terrible. The clothing. I can't speak for the movie. I can't watch it. The clothing is so bad. I just can't watch it. Yeah, I just can't watch it. It's just so bad. So, but and Agnes Hathaway wearing Agnes / Anne Hathaway wearing her hair in that fashion, no. Wearing those clothes, never. No one. So yeah, no, you just wouldn't have wanted to do it. It's not even a question of whether it was socially acceptable or not necessarily. You wouldn't have wanted to do it. By this, so interestingly, I've noticed a trend. You can follow the development of chimney pieces in homes, accompanies or presages the development of exposed hairstyles. So chimneys are an invention of like the 12th century. And I know you all are probably shocked to hear that, but it's true. At least not chimneys necessarily full stop, but chimneys as something that you attach to the hearth in your home to funnel the smoke away is a relatively recent invention in Western Europe. And, thank you. And so you can actually follow the spread of chimney pieces throughout Europe. It starts in Italy. That's where they first start getting introduced, and not everyone gets them. It's a luxury item. We have expense accounts from the Duke of Norfolk from the 1460s and 70s talking about having chimney pieces added to his manor houses, right? And he's the Duke of Norfolk. He's a peer of the realm, and he still is just now in the 15th century getting chimney pieces added to his home. So most normal people still didn't have chimneys even in the 16th century. But you can actually see the development, the spread of the dispersion of chimneys throughout Europe seems almost shortly thereafter accompanied by women starting to expose their hair and styling their hair rather than covering it. And I don't think that's an accident. So yeah, observations there. Let me see. You should do a full edited video on your favorite garments and the lessons we can take from their construction. So Twitchy, I actually have, I don't know if you've seen it, I actually do have a video on the lessons I've learned from sewing medieval historical garments over the years. So if you're interested in learning my lessons learned, then you can check out on YouTube. I have a full length video, I don't know, it's about 20 minutes, I think, about my sewing mistakes, accompanied by plenty of visuals and what I should have done instead of what I did. Let me see. I'm new here. Your subject focus is very interesting. Is your interest in the Middle Ages exclusive to fashion? If not, what other subjects interest you? What attracted you to medieval fashion? Sadly, Paul, thank you for that great question. I am a practitioner of medieval living history, so it all interests me. I'm interested in daily life, and not just from the Middle Ages. That's just what I'm focusing on here. In general, I've always had a fascination with how people live and lived their lives. It's one of the reasons I travel, is I like to see how other people in the world live their lives in different cultures, in different circumstances. That fascinates me. And I want to experience it myself. So living history is a way that I can try to experience how people live their lives in the past, specifically 15th century. The reason I chose the 15th century over other centuries is because the 15th century is the first century in Western history for which we have reliable sources for dance. And I know that's going to seem silly to you, but for me, dance is such an integral part of my social life that not knowing about how to dance means I'm less interested in reenacting that period of history, because I want to do the dances. And if we don't have information about the dances, then we can't do them accurately. So that's why I focused on the 15th century mostly. Yeah, what other subjects interest you? Oh gosh, every kind of handcraft really does interest me. Not necessarily to do them all, but they're interesting. How they interconnect, how the stages of production, how things were made. I'm very interested in making things in general. But I'm very interested in philosophy. I am interested in poetry. From all periods, really. Literature is, the way human imagination is something that's very fascinating to me. Any kind of art or craft definitely interests me. I think I already mentioned that, but I'll mention it again. Textile arts, they all interest me. I'm not so interested in working with metal myself, but I like to learn about the process. I like to understand the processes. I don't know why, but I have this intense need to understand how and why. It's been a driving force for my whole life. I'm insanely curious to my own detriment. So yeah, a lot of interest. Honestly, I'm one of those people who, if I were immortal, I would never be able to get bored. It would be impossible to get bored. I'm just so fascinated by so many things. I love learning about anything that's relevant to how people live their lives. Yeah, there's nothing that's boring to me. I even like studying historical economics because it's so impactful to how people live their daily lives. So what attracted me to the medieval fashion? There's something about the medieval aesthetic that has always appealed to me from my youngest years. That could be because we had a lot of books on medieval history growing up with medieval art in them. And so when I would just pull the books off of the shelf to look at them, I was immersed, basted, marinated in that imagery. But also, I think I mentioned, I grew up in Delaware in the United States, East Coast, center of the East Coast. And so I was surrounded by museums that were endowed by robber barons who loved medieval art and architecture. So any museum we went to basically was full of medieval artifacts. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Cloisters, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Walters Gallery, the National Gallery. So I think I was just kind of primed to like this aesthetic. And, I mean, come on, it's a good aesthetic. Tell me this is not a good aesthetic, huh? That's a great question. Thank you, Sadly Paul. Welcome to the community. How many people would it have taken to weave a tapestry like that, God? So when we see this tapestry it's large, but it's not huge. I had a friend who made a tapestry about this size, and it took him a couple of years, but he also wasn't working on it every day. I honestly don't have a clear answer for you, and I don't know of any. I don't know. I've never read a clear answer on that. But there would have been I know at the very least hundreds of hours, like understanding how long the basic techniques take. And there's so many stages to making a tapestry like this. So many of you don't know. Maybe let me explain to you how a tapestry was made, and then maybe that will give you an idea of how long it would take. So it depends on what you mean by to make, because first we have to make the raw materials, right? So first we have to make all of the threads that have to be, tapestries are usually a blend of wool and silk. So wool is a pain in the ass to process. It's a lot of steps to go from fleecy sheep covered in sheep poo in the field to nice red wool, right? So you have to, wool processing alone is a crap ton of steps and a lot of time. Then silk actually is less complicated to process because silk basically comes off of the silk cocoon in lovely filaments. But even then, you still have to dye it, you still have to ply it, so you have to spin it and ply it so that you actually have proper thread, make it in the thickness you need. And then there's the tapestry itself, which actually has to be designed. And frequently they would get what we now know are famous artists. They would be the ones who would draw the cartoons. The cartoon is the design, right? We use the word cartoon now to mean an animated picture, but that's not what it used to mean. In art, the cartoon was the design, was the drawing, the sketch, basically. And so an artist would have to do a study, would have to come up with designs that were then accepted by the person commissioning the tapestry. And then very frequently, the artist would actually draw the design, the artist. So like Hans Memling, if he designed a tapestry cartoon, he or his apprentices would be the person who would come and draw the design on the ground fabric and would actually then paint it in watercolors so that the appropriate colors were in place so that all the tapestry weaver had to do, all the tapestry weaver had to do, in quotes, is then go over the cartoon and weave in the pattern with the yarns in the various colors. So there are so many steps of production before you get to the final tapestry. And that's to say nothing about the fact that after it's woven, it might have to have a backing added onto it. And then it has to have hardware added onto it so that it can be suspended on the wall, right? So there's just so many steps of production. I mean, I mean, in terms of time, I don't know how many hours, but I know that tapestries would take in some case, multiple years. Commissions would take multiple years to produce. Part of the reason that tapestries would take so long, though, is because they didn't just want a tapestry, generally. They wanted a suite of tapestries connected by theme, like the Lady and the Unicorn, like the Hunt of the Unicorn, right? Where they're connected by theme, but they were also designed to fit a specific space. So if you've ever looked at extant medieval tapestries and wondered why, say in the case of the Lady and the Unicorn, some of them are rectangular, some of them are horizontally rectangular, some are vertically rectangular, like this one, some are square. And that's because it was designed to fit a specific chamber so that it would fit on this wall between those windows and that wall next to that chimney piece and over the lintel of the door there. And so it would actually basically enswath the entire room in tapestry instead of wallpaper or painting. You had tapestries. So an entire chamber, a chambre, as they were called, a chamber of tapestries would take at least a year, if not longer, depending on the workshop who was working on them. Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe not certain if that's what you wanted, but thank you so much. This is one of my favorite series too. I figured it was an allegory for Christ, but I hadn't known for sure. There's such beautiful pieces. Yeah, talking about the hunt of the unicorn, it is an allegory of Christ. Speaking of the hunt of the unicorn, here is this is a silk screened silk scarf that actually depicts. I call this my travel tapestry because I can take this with me and easily hang it behind me when I want to do medieval live streams on the road, because it is silk, so it weighs nothing, and I do also use it as my scarf when I go out in the cold. But yeah, this is the hunt of the unicorn in captivity. And you can see the wounds of Christ there, the piercing from the spear, all of that sort of stuff on our Christ allegory. The Metropolitan Museum of Art used to sell these. They are not cheap though. I think we paid $140 for this. But I'm one of those people, I buy very few items. I almost never buy new clothes. I buy like a nice piece once a year and then I keep it forever like that. Let me see. Almost all nunneries cut their hair with the professed nuns. We have written documents on hair knots being found in convents when being dismantled or raided. Yeah, I can believe that. Okay, I've gotten, let me see. Jim O'Neill says, would you have beautiful wavy hair, Rachel? I do have beautiful wavy hair when it's humid. When it's dry like this, my hair hates it. Let me see. Let's see. Oh, Tanya, welcome. I'm sorry. I'm so far behind on the comments. Tanya, thank you for that. Oh, goodness. The ASMR library official says, thanks for answering my question. As someone who reads a lot of Arthuriana, women are described with long hair, but I accept that as a romanticized concept. So fascinating. Yeah. I mean, no. So in the you're talking about the Arthurian legends, yeah. So in the Arthurian legends, most of those take place in the 12th century, and in the 12th century, the way of styling hair was actually to keep it in braids, even for young women, right? They would have these really long braids, sometimes in braid casings. It looks like they're depicted in, bound with ribbons like all the way down. You can see this especially in cathedrals like the statues in Chartres in France, the 12th century columnar statues that depict biblical queens and whatnot, right? And yeah, in the Arthurian, I have to remind people, the Arthurian romances are not history. They are medieval fantasy. It's very interesting that people seem to think that fantasy as a genre, literary genre, is new. It is not. The Arthurian legends are fantasy pure. They are fantastic. There is so much magic happening in them. There's so much weirdness happening, so much mysticism that's being conveyed that, yeah, you can't necessarily take the descriptions as the way people would regularly dress. But also there's a lot of weird, abnormal, just like in any novel that's a work of fiction, there's a lot of atypical situations that are depicted in these stories as being key to the plot driver. You know, when you encounter a random woman in the forest and she has her hair down, that would have been a warning signal to a knight. It's like, uh-oh, there's a random woman in this forest. She has her hair down. I bet she's a spirit. She's a fairy. She's a fairy. And then invariably the knight rides towards her because they're stupid. But yeah, so you're right, exactly. Women being described as having their hair down. You have to take it in the context. Yep. Let's see. Gosh, I've gotten so far back. Okay, the Walters Gallery is in Baltimore, Susan. It's fantastic. It's a private gallery. It's amazing. Yeah. God bless the Walters. Let me see. Jose said, I just wanted to stop in and say your enthusiasm and knowledge that you're speaking with is contagious. Thank you for the bits of history. Jose Garcia, gracias. Qué amable de ti. Bienvenido. Silk is a lot warmer than what people would assume it is. Yep. Silk is actually a bit amazing. Depending on how it's woven, silk can actually be really good at being a natural coolant, leading to evaporative cooling and all that, or it can be a really great insulator. And the Mongols knew this. They wore silk undershirts. Everyone's, I know, you're like, but you always say linen. I said, Western Europe, my friends, Western Europe. The Mongols were living in the steppes, and in the winter on the steppes, it is brutally cold. So they wore silk undershirts, which is a great insulator and also antimicrobial. Let me see. Scarf is precious. Yeah, the scarf is pretty amazing. Sorry, I got really behind in the comments. Some of you know my format is to monologue and answer for about, I don't know, an hour. And then when I take a break, I get to check the comments again. So if I missed any questions, please pop them in the comments again, and I will definitely try to get them. I'm not ignoring you, but the comments started moving really quickly. Yeah. Yeah, the Walters Gallery is an amazing place. I love the Walters Gallery. I haven't been back in a couple of years. I haven't been back since 2020, since right before COVID. The last time I went to the Walters Gallery, 2 weeks later, the world shut down. So I should definitely go back and see what it's like now that the world is back up and going again. So I am just doing repairs. So I'm just going to show you what I've repaired thus far. This is a stocking, a woman's stocking from this style of stocking. Actually, we have evidence of from at least the 12th, 11th century, well into the 16th century. This is actually bias cut linen. It is one of the known common applications of bias cut in the Middle Ages is linen stockings, which were a thing, and we have some extant ones actually. So that actually takes advantage of the grain going against the grain to have some stretch to it, right? And this would go up to just over my knee, and then I would wear a garter on it. If you want to see how I get dressed in the entire outfit, and I mean really from skin out with lots of history and detailed descriptions on my YouTube channel, I have several getting dressed videos from the 15th century. I have 3 getting dressed videos for Italian clothing, and I have 1 getting dressed video for Burgundian. Lots of information is provided there, so feel free to go and check that out. So these, I walk through them pretty much always. I always walk through them. I always create holes in them. So I am resoling nearly all of them just by putting an entirely new, thicker fustian sole on the bottom. And so that's what I was doing as I was standing here. And then I was repairing my one of my kerchiefs, just like this. I have 3 of these at this point.
And soon to be 4.
Soon to be 4, because I'm going to be offering a workshop on making this lovely linen kerchief. I'm going to be offering a Zoom workshop. It'll be 3 sessions in March. Yep. So yes.
You did miss a comment.
Okay.
Captain Rail 88 says, do you know anything about medieval toiletries? I've seen the architecture and furniture, but the daily life items aren't something I hear a lot about.
That's true. Yes. Okay. Medieval.
I think you're caught on.
Yeah. Okay, great. Medieval toiletries. I'll get to it. I love the way bias cut tartan looks. Yeah, bias cut tartan is super fun. Yep. Okay. How many languages do you speak? Your French pronunciation of words sounds so good. And Espanol also. I speak fluently, or have spoken at times, various times in my life. I have spoken 5 languages fluently. Some of my fluent languages aren't as fluent as they used to be because I haven't had a chance to use them very much. French, German, Spanish, Italian, and English is 5. I'm learning Korean. I can speak it like a baby, well, not a baby, better than a baby, like a 4-year-old. I can speak it like a 4-year-old. And I've, dabbled in Portuguese and Mandarin and Arabic at various times. Yeah. I can pretty much get by in reading any Romance language. My reading comprehension is great. Let me see how many language. Yeah. Okay. So medieval toiletries. Okay, so for those who don't know, there is actually there are 2 lovely ladies who are experts in ancient Roman and medieval toiletries and cosmetics who have started a company reproducing original recipes for cosmetics, for skincare, for hair care, Cosmetica Obscura. And now you're going to say, but didn't they use lead in their cosmetics? Yes. Cosmetica Obscura does not. Anything that was toxic in these recipes, they have found a safe modern substitute for, or a safe medieval substitute for. But it's very interesting, the smells, because based on the recipes, we know the kinds of pungent aroma spices that they would include in their like skincare. So now we're all very focused in the West, and we're focused on floral smells. I've lost my needle. I don't know where my needle went. Okay, I got talking. I'll find the needle again someday. Oh, it's still in there. Ha ha ha. So one of the things that's very different about medieval skincare, for instance, and even ancient Roman skincare, is that the smells are much more mystical to me because I'm Roman Catholic, right? So I'm used to the bells and smells of a Catholic mass, of a Catholic high mass, which means frankincense and myrrh. And so a lot of these cosmetics, these recipes from all across medieval Europe, actually many of them do incorporate frankincense and or myrrh into them to give them that smell. And also spices like you wouldn't expect, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, those kinds of smells are actually incorporated into, say, moisturizer for your skin. So you actually have a much more pungent smell with these cosmetics than you would from the modern one that smells like lavender or rose or whatever. So yeah, so that would be medieval skincare. Was also, they used a lot of animal fats for skincare, tallow, duck fat, lard, even butter sometimes was prescribed as a moisturizer. Let's see, they were definitely focused on trying anti-aging. Very much mentioned very often how effective these anti-aging items were is, of course, a matter for debate, but they certainly cared about it. And we have manuals, we have manuscripts that detail recipes for hair care products, for skin care products, to how powders to clean and polish your teeth, things to help your nails grow, ways to, I'm trying to think, dye your hair. So yeah, medieval, basically almost anything, even in the 16th century, there's a whole 1560 something Italian manual that has so many different recipes for how to curl your hair chemically. So even chemical curling is not a new concept. So almost anything that we try to do to ourselves now without surgery, they were trying to do to themselves then. It's just that they had a different set of ingredients. We have a lot of synthetics now. They didn't have any synthetics really. So they were just doing it with more natural ingredients, which is not to say that they were always salubrious, right? Lead is lead, no matter whether it's organic lead or not. Arsenic is bad for you no matter what. Orpiment, not good for you. And yet a lot of their recipes included all of that. In some cases, all in the same recipe. Mercury also. I mean, it's a little scary. But like they actually had sunblock. There is a book called the Trotula, the Trotta of Salerno. And she was supposedly a female physician from Salerno, which was a big medieval center of the medical arts, and women doctors were known to be there. And she supposedly composed this book on women's gynecology and women's care, women's health. And she actually has a whole section on cosmetics and skin and hair care. And one of the items she includes is a sunblock. It's a mineral sunblock. I read through the recipe and I was like, this is a natural mineral sunblock. It involved olive oil and, hear me out, white lead. White lead was the mineral that would block the UV. White lead would be an effective mineral blocker. It would also be bad for you. So that's why Cosmetica Obscura has used titanium dioxide instead of white lead. But basically the same ideas. They had the same concerns that we do. They had rouge and ways to make their cheeks and lips red, kohl for the eyes, although they didn't really do eyeshadow. Eyeshadow doesn't seem to be a thing. I haven't seen any mention of eyeshadow in Western Europe, and especially not the way we do it. Glamour eyes, not so much. Eyebrows were generally, the style for eyebrows was generally thin and arched. So not thick, but thin and arched. Yeah, so we do know a lot about medieval cosmetics. Now, some of the recipes definitely assume that you already know what the item is. Like these manuals are not aimed at people from the 21st century who have no concept, have never seen these creams before. They're clearly aimed at people who have seen these creams before. So in some cases, the ladies at Cosmetica of Skora have to make some assumptions to make the recipe work, because, especially if the recipe just says, take these spices and grind them together, then put them on your body. Just ground up spices are not going to stay on your skin, right? So they had to figure out, well, should we then suspend those spices in a fat suspension? So, tallow or duck fat, or should it be in something like olive oil, or should it be decocted? Should it be steeped in water and then applied on the body as a water, right? So there are some assumptions that we have to make. But this really lines up well with my discussion on medieval hygiene, which is to say that medieval people really, really deeply cared about smelling sweet and about being clean. I get so frustrated by the number of people who comment under any video where I mention medieval hygiene and how frustrating depictions of dirty medieval people are with, nuh-uh, they were dirty. Like, no, they weren't. No, humans don't want to be dirty. That is not our natural state. It is not comfortable to have literal dirt on your skin. So, the prevalence, the frequency with which we see these kinds of manuals, starting at least in the 12th century and going all the way up to the 19th century, some of the medieval manuals of health and body care are copied again and again and again, all the way into the 19th century. One that I was reading this morning is a prime example of that. The Salerno Regimen of Health, which is called something in, the equivalent of that in Latin. It's this poem that talks about provides all sorts of really common sense health advice that to any modern person would hear this health advice and go, yeah, that makes sense, until you get to the bloodletting part. The phlebotomy part, no, doesn't make sense anymore. But the rest of it definitely makes sense to a modern person. And so this book was copied, we found at least 100 different manuscripts containing this poem, right? And then starting with the Gutenberg printing press, the book gets printed. There's at least 300 different printed editions that have survived, and it keeps getting updated. So the Elizabethan version of this book definitely has some very Elizabethan language in it versus the 12th century version, but it just provides all kinds of fascinating details. It talks about the first thing you should do in the morning. This book of health, it says the first thing you do in the morning is you get up, you comb your hair, you brush your teeth, and then it says that you should walk around gently. You should loosen your body. You should take a moment to stretch. It actually recommends warming your body up physically to prepare for the day. And it says to brush your teeth and to wash your face and your hands and comb your hair, right? That's the first thing it says you should do in the morning. And then it goes on to talk about when you should wash your hands before and after dinner. It talks about eating healthy things, the kinds of foods you should eat or not eat. There's also some weird things like, take garlic if you've against poison. Obviously, that's depending on the poison, probably not actually going to work. But so we actually know a lot about personal body care in the Middle Ages. We have recipes for treatments, for salves, for balms. There's even one from the 16th century, the title of which is, what is it to make your breasts look perky or bigger? Plumper, right? There's one recipe from I think it's that 1560 source that's entitled, the title translates to balm to make your breasts plumper. It's just a moisturizer. It really is. It doesn't make anything plumper. Look plumper. It doesn't make anything plumper, but it certainly moisturizes very nicely. They also had lip balm. They had balm specifically for moisturizing their lips. So they understood chapped lips were an issue. They had a remedy for it. Yeah. Let me see. Scrolling back. Did I miss anything? I love good history around the Middle Ages. Too many myths around. Yeah, there's just too many myths. There are so many bad myths about the Middle Ages, and they get perpetuated really badly because of social media. It's way worse than it used to be because social media makes it so much easier now to perpetuate those myths, versus before you had to print it. Now we can just spread bad information with the press of a finger. What is your favorite medieval European culture? Ooh, I don't know. Oh, you took too long. You didn't know where it was? Where's this one been? It's been hiding.
It's on top of everything.
This is, speaking of cosmetics, this is one of Cosmetica Obscura's products. I bought a whole bunch of their stuff this past Penzik, and I've been using it regularly as part of my regular skincare regimen. Gosh, it smells so nice. It smells so mystical. It smells like a church at high mass. It's great. And it's so luscious. It really moisturizes really well. I actually like to use I use one of my other like aloe based moisturizers, and then I put this on top to seal it in. Really nice. And yeah, this lasts, like, I've had this since August, and you can see I'm not nearly done with it yet. And it has olive oil, duck fat, beeswax, camphor oil, nutmeg oil, clove oil. Yeah, good stuff. I can rub that in. Yeah. So part of my mission is to bust those myths, and I see them all the time in my comments. This idea that medieval people were just dirty. One person made a very clever comment. So one of my complaints, some of you know, I really do not enjoy most modern production set in the Middle Ages because, again, everyone, even sometimes the aristocrats are dirty. They're covered in dirt, like caked in dirt, not just their clothes, their skin. And as someone noted, as though no one could just take a rag and some water and wipe the dirt off of their face. There is this really weird idea that if you don't have access to a bathtub or a shower even, then you can't possibly be clean. And that is patently not true. I personally, you don't need to, I don't shower every day. I do wash every day, but I don't shower every day. I don't need to. I have a washcloth with water. And if I need to, soap. But unless I'm actually dirty, I don't really need the soap. Right? So medieval people did have access to baths, though, and that's the weird thing. The average person had access to the public bathhouses that were everywhere in medieval Europe up until the 16th century. It's in the 16th century, the early 16th century, when all the bathhouses start closing, or a lot of them start closing because of syphilis. There was a concern about contracting diseases at the bathhouses. There was a concern that could catch plague there. Syphilis was definitely a problem. So people stopped going to the bathhouses, and a lot of the bathhouses closed, which meant people started getting less clean. But also, you don't need a bath, literally a bath, to clean yourself. You really don't. You just need a bowl of water and a washcloth. And you don't even necessarily need soap, but they also had soap. They had the soap par excellence for cleaning your skin was Castile soap, which you can still get today. And it was famous and requested by ladies, especially because they recognized that it was a good way to get soot and dirt off of their skin, because you would build up some soot buildup by the end of the day. And they recognized that it was a good, gentle way because it's olive oil based. And you could actually super saturate Castile soap when you're making it with olive oil so that it's naturally moisturizing.
And you have a video showing it from Penzik. You bathing.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Right. Oh, I forgot. I was washing my hair. I think I just washed my hair, right?
I thought you did some bathing.
I actually have a recording, if you want to see it, from a live stream demonstration I did of medieval hair washing, based on a reconstruction of medieval hair washing that I did at this past 2-week living history event I attended. If you check out the recordings on my YouTube channel and look up hair washing, you should probably be able to find it. Yeah, it was a 50-minute live stream demonstrated from beginning to end. Yep. Have you ever used beef tallow on your skin, Rachel? All the time. My skin loves beef tallow. Oh my God, my skin just sucks it up and it feels so smooth and so silky. Yeah, I use beef tallow on a regular basis. There's a really good sunblock that you can get in natural skin and in natural product stores in the US that uses beef tallow as its base, rather than all of those polyunsaturated oils that will go rancid. And it's got vanilla in it, so it actually smells like a nice, healthy marshmallow. It smells so good. Yeah, love beef tallow. Love it so much. Am I the beef? American Indians clean their bodies in clay from the rivers is what I read in their hair too. Yeah, clay is a very good way to clean your skin. I actually have several clay-based skin I do. I use clay to clean my face at least once a week. I do a clay mask, and then afterwards I just wipe it off with the rag, and my skin is so soft and so clean afterwards.
It startles me every time.
Yep. Clay is a great way to clean your skin, which again, people think, but you're putting dirt on your skin. Yes, but then you're wiping it off afterwards is the point. If you watch in nature, horses take dust baths all the time. Do you ever wonder why your horse, after you bathe it, your beautiful white horse goes out into the field and rolls in the dirt? It's because that's how horses feel clean. They take a dust bath, right? And they're not the only, lots of animals in nature take dust baths. So yeah, but it's cleanliness is something that everyone wanted. And one of the big reasons that everyone in medieval society would have wanted to smell clean is that one of the prevailing theories of illness was the theory of miasma. And miasma is, in their mind, was foul smelling air, which meant that the only way to fight contagion, to fight disease that wasn't humorally based, to fight contagion was to smell sweet, so that your sweet smelling person would drive away the miasma. If you stink, the miasma will come to you. So everyone, and this was kind of one of those common knowledge things. You didn't have to be a physician to understand that, to think that disease was called by bad smells. Basically, everyone believed that. It wasn't quite true. They were right in that there was something in the air that was causing them to get sick. It just wasn't the bad smell that was causing it. But still, that meant that everyone tried to smell sweet. They wanted their homes to smell sweet. They wanted their persons to smell sweet. Now, I will never say that medieval cities as a rule smelled good. That would be a lie. And even medieval people understood that their cities smelled bad. Big cities, not all cities. I don't mean every city. Villages were okay. But even medieval people talked about their own great cities and how they stank, especially the later you get in the Middle Ages and the more the population grows in those cities. But that's not the same as people smelling bad. That's not the same thing. Jim, you buy 5 pounds of tallow at a time? Nice. Do you have access to an Amish supplier of that, I'm wondering? I generally make my own tallow. If I get oxtail, then oxtail these days is really fatty, and I like fat. I do. But there's a maximum amount of fat that even I can tolerate on my oxtail after it's cooked, or in the broth if I'm making some kind of yummy oxtail stew. So I end up cutting off the bigger slabs of the fat, and then I render that into my own tallow. I usually cook with it, though. I'll be honest. I tend to save that tallow for cooking rather than using on my skin. But, you know, if I end up moisturizing my skin by getting some of that yummy fat on it while I'm preparing it, great. All the better. Love tallow. Let's see. Scrolling back. Okay, yes. So the topic of medieval hygiene. And so people ask me, well, how do you know all of that? Well, because we have hundreds of manuscripts that have survived from the Middle Ages that specifically talk about when to clean yourself, what parts of yourself to clean, why you should clean yourself. We have books of etiquette that talk about why it's absolutely disgusting for diners to stick their fingers in their mouths and use their mouths to clean them in the middle of a meal. That was considered rude and disgusting in the Middle Ages, from the 12th century to the 15th century, because I have a book of etiquette from the 12th century, I have a book of etiquette from the 15th and the 16th century, and they all contain a lot of overlap. So while you should never assume that certain concepts or practices are unchanged across the centuries in the Middle Ages, sometimes they are, because sometimes it's just common sense, people. You know, yes, medieval people did not necessarily have the same kind of empirical approach to research and development, but they had an approach, right? And they had the ability to reason, and they had the ability to observe cause and effect. And I'm confident that enough people observed bad outcomes when diners stuck their fingers in their mouths to clean them and then used their fingers to keep eating from the communal plates and bowls. So, yeah. Just because they didn't have our scientific instrumentation and our fully codified system of scientific analysis and discovery doesn't mean that they were any less capable of logic and reason than we are. You have to take me with a grain of salt. Half the time I don't know what I'm talking about. Oh, Jim, it's all good, Jim. And is that why everyone used incense during medieval times to counteract the city smell? My family still uses lots of incense with pleasant aromas. Yeah, for certain, depending on the city where you are and depending on the neighborhood in which you lived. And yeah, they weren't using, I'm not familiar with incense like most people here think of incense. Modern people think of incense. They didn't have incense sticks. That wasn't a thing, not like that. You know, they had frankincense and myrrh, but those were extreme luxury items. Frankincense and myrrh were absolutely luxury imports. So not just anyone could have frankincense and myrrh, and they were generally reserved for ecclesiastical purposes. But at least on the burning part of it. But yeah, you know, the people would sprinkle the insides of their homes with fresh, sweet smelling herbs and blossoms and even spices. In some cases, the really wealthy would even sometimes use spices, which is, considering how expensive some of those spices were, that's kind of crazy. But yeah, that they would do. They would sprinkle spices or herbs everywhere, sweet smelling herbs all over the floor. And then, you know, eventually they would stop smelling sweet and they would get swept up and then they would be replaced with fresh ones. I'm not so familiar with burning of incense in medieval homes. In Europe anyway, I haven't seen evidence of that as a regular practice. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. I just haven't found the evidence for it. I mean, understand that the study of history and historical material culture is constantly evolving. New information is constantly coming out. And, you know, I'm still learning and I hope to never stop learning. So yeah, castor oil is very good for your skin, 100%. And it's also, depending on your hair, it can be good for your hair too. My hair does not respond well to castor oil at all, very sadly. UK Yara says, I met a girl, I think she was from an Amish mother, 2 daughters, great clothing, people, they are pure people. The world of cities has changed the world. I mean, you know, historically, humans kind of tend to go through phases of urban to rural habitation. We've had phases where most people lived in cities. Then we've had phases where most people didn't. And we're now back at a super urban phase. It would probably take a serious catastrophe for us to ever go back to a rural phase again, but who knows, it could happen. Yeah. Let's see, my mom never used incense sticks. She throws small rocks on hot coals and it starts to smoke the whole house. Don't know the terminology of that incense. I haven't heard of that either. But where is it that you live, Don't Cup? Yes.
No, I'm joking.
What?
Armor and Casting sells a 15th century pomander for holding musk.
Oh, it's 16th century.
It says 15th century on the website.
Okay. So if you are, but so one thing that people did do starting in the 15th century, at least in Western Europe, is they actually started attaching to the bottoms of their belts. I don't have my belt with me. They started attaching to their bottoms of their belts, basically a little metal cage, pretty ornate and pretty, called a pomander. And inside that pomander, you could put sweet smelling things like spices, like herbs, like flowers. The wealthier could obviously afford something like frankincense or myrrh to put in there. And that would hypothetically make yet another way in which they could carry sweet smells around with them. But contrary to popular belief, it was not because they smelled so bad. That wasn't what it was about. It was not a question of, I smell so bad, I need to make sure no one smells me. No, it was because they wanted to smell nice to fight off the miasma. So it wasn't a cover up of body odor. Yeah. I also heard that they used salt in their homes at the doorways in and around the windows. I can't remember the reason. I've not heard that myself, Jim, but that doesn't mean it's not true. And that could be true for maybe a very specific place in a very specific time, or a very specific place over a period of time. I have not heard of that practice in Florence, for instance, or in Burgundy. Again, doesn't mean it's not true. I just haven't heard of it myself. Putting incense grains on white embers is how churches still do incense today. So I'm sure that's how medieval church did it. Oh yeah, 100% Twitchy. No, I was referring to people in their private homes doing that. I don't have any evidence of people in their homes burning incense in that way in a private home. Churches, 100%. Absolutely. Yeah. I just haven't seen that as being a practice in a medieval home. And also, again, frankincense and myrrh were very expensive. It was an extreme luxury item. At least in Europe, it doesn't, frankincense and myrrh come from the Arabian Peninsula. So from a very specific set of trees that don't grow in Europe. So it was an imported item, and it was limited. It's not an unlimited resource. So, definitely a luxury item. Oh yeah, it's funny, Twitch. I never thought of, so I don't think of frankincense and myrrh as rocks. It didn't occur to me. They're resins, they're tree resin, they're hardened tree sap, basically. I guess that is technically a rock. Eventually it becomes a rock. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah, I guess that is a rock. Yeah, technically frankincense and myrrh are resins, but they do certainly look like a rock. They are not soft. Oh, right. Got it, Twitchy. Understood. Yep. Yeah, so let's see. I have a little list here of comments I wanted to address. I don't know where the list went. Handsome, I don't know where the list is. It's gone. The list has been eaten by my room. Darn it. Oh, there it is. It's over here. Okay. Oh, rag curls. Some of you, someone made a comment under one of my videos about hair, I believe it was, talking about rag curls as a way to curl your hair to get those curls that you see in the fringe on the Italian women. And they commented that, rag curls were done in the 18th century. Yes, absolutely. Rag curls were done in the 18th and the 19th century. I have zero evidence, unfortunately, of rag curls being done in the 15th century. None. I've experimented with it. It can create a look that's sort of similar to what you see in the portraits, but even then not exact. But again, I have not seen any visual evidence of it. I've seen no documentary evidence of it. I haven't seen a reference to it in the literature. So I don't think it was something that was done in the 15th century, in part because fabric was way more valuable and expensive in the 15th century than it was in either the 18th or the 19th century. I suspect might be why rag curls aren't more of a thing. Yeah, so I haven't seen evidence. If any of you have evidence positive for, or even just not even proof positive, just actual evidence from the 15th century documenting rag curls, not just that it could have been done, but that it was done, I'd be very interested to hear about that. Otherwise, it seems, unfortunately, as far as I can tell, that those beautiful curls you see on the fringes of all those Italian portraits in the 15th century, right? It looks like those were either attained through a curling iron, a very rudimentary, heated up in the fire kind of curling iron. So not the kind I would want to apply to my hair because I would just end up burning it. Or chemical curling with a concoction of chemicals that would probably not be super wonderful. Those are the only two bits of evidence I have. I have a visual, I've actually seen a curling iron in a 15th century depiction, and I have recipes for concoctions from Italy that are designed to make your hair curl. I do not have any evidence of pin curls. I don't have any evidence of rag curls. I don't have any evidence of any kind of do it the night before curl, basically, is what I'm saying. And braids don't produce those curls. Trust me, I've tried. No braid I've ever tried produces curls. It just produces crimps, which are not what you're seeing in those portraits. So, yeah. Let's see. Oh, onion skins, dye stuffs. Okay, so this ties in with the general discussion of the medieval world was not a drab mauve and cream colored place. That's another thing that drives me crazy about most modern productions set in the Middle Ages is that, you know, everyone is depicted as wearing gray, tan, or dirt colored. Which is not true. Most people wore colors. Even the poorest of the poor had cast-offs from their better-heeled betters that were dyed in colors. So even if they were faded, it was still a color. It was still red or yellow or green or blue. It was not mauve, eggshell, taupe, dirt. So even the poorest of the poor had colored clothes, and often they would be given bequeathed clothing by people who of means, by affluent merchants, by the aristocracy. They would actually, money would be set aside to commission a suit of clothes, 20 suits of clothes for the parish poor, shirt and tunic. And the tunics are always dyed some kind of color. They're blue or they're green or they're red. I even saw one where they were black. They actually commissioned black clothes for them. And if you know how expensive black dye stuffs were, or how expensive black fabrics were, because the dyeing process is crazy involved, involving lots of over dyeing, repeat dyeing baths, and it's very expensive. So no, 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 no. They were not just wearing depressing brown. But someone in defense of the idea that that even the lower classes could afford to dye their own clothes, someone brought up onion skins. I am so sorry, everyone. Not only do I have no evidence of onion skins being used as a medieval dye stuff in Europe, I don't think they could have been. And here's why. The kind of onions that they have, the cultivars of onions that existed in the Middle Ages, and there were multiple, don't mistake me, but none of them had the big, thick yellow skins that modern onions have, or red skins, big, thick skins of any color that modern onions have. There were yellow onions. I've seen depictions of them in like Taquinum sanitatis herbals from the 15th century. So they did have yellow onions, at least they're depicted as being yellow, but they don't have those skins. Modern onions have been selectively bred to have really thick skins because now we grow them in Ohio and then we transport them to California, for instance. So they have to have a longer shelf life. They have to have thicker skins to protect them from bruising, but also from rotting. Right? So we've selectively bred them to have those skins. That's a modern development. Medieval onions didn't have those thick skins. So not only have I seen no evidence I have read dozens of dyeing manuscripts from the Middle Ages referencing dyeing processes for a variety of colors across a variety of budgets, and onion skins are never mentioned once. Also, I've never seen any archaeological reports of dyes that could have come from onions from extant textiles. So yeah, onion skins are good for soup broth. All the cut off bits of veggies can go into a broth making pot. Yeah, I do. I have a bowl in my freezer that has all the offcuts of my onions for specifically making broth. Yeah, I eat onions like apples, love onions, the white ones. Jim, my condottiero also can eat apples like onions. Yeah. White ones, though, are nice. The white ones are sweet. Yellow ones, nope, not a shot. You're not getting me to eat a yellow onion like an apple. I will cook it until it turns a delicious caramelized brown, but yeah, definitely not eating it like an apple. Okay, so some of you have asked why all these repairs? Why all these repairs? Because I wear these garments on a very regular basis and I wear them like real clothes. I do not treat these like some kind of delicate museum piece, right? I wear them and I go about my life. I cook, I clean, I do workouts in them. I dance in them for hours. I go for long walks up and down mountains even. So all of my clothes get put through real life, in fact, which means things wear down. I use natural fibers. One of the few benefits or only benefits of synthetic fibers is that they do last longer. I will never debate with you. Polyester fabric lasts way longer and takes a way harder beating than any natural fiber does. I mean, I have experienced that myself because of the paces through which I put my natural fiber garments. But I try to only wear natural fibers and I only sew with natural fibers, which means that eventually everything wears out and you just have to do a new seam or make a patch or replace the whole thing. So that's why we have all of these repairs that I have to do on a fairly regular basis. Okay, couple of good questions. What would have been the most common dyes and colors, and why was it so hard to dye fabric black? This kind of goes really nicely together. So it depends on where you are. What would have been the most common dye and colors in a certain way, because different parts of Europe have a different prevalence of weeds that can make things a pretty color. But you know, in terms of the aristocrats, what is in fashion actually in terms of colors changes over time. So there's a period of the Middle Ages that some economists, what was the term for it? It was something about it, the red gold. I think I saw it being called, because Kermes red, crimson red, basically made from the louse of the Kermes louse, which grows on a specific oak tree in the Mediterranean, was the most expensive red. That is that glorious red that you see on the stockings that men are wearing, or the hosen that men are wearing in the 15th century, right? That's that glorious red on all those vestments from the 14th and 15th century that are in museums, that are the gorgeous high-low cut velvet pattern. That's Kermes. So for a while, that red was the red of choice. And then eventually black became the color of choice. By the time the Burgundian court is really picking up full steam in the mid 15th century, Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Good, is super, super in love with the color black. And the reason why black is so expensive is because you don't have to get the true rich black, right? Again, you can get a kind of off black or a brown just using some kinds of wood that have lots of tannin that grow, oak galls, or I think alderwood I read also works. There's some roots too, but that black will not be a true black. It will have like brownish hues, or it will fade quickly. To get that deep, rich black, like you see in those 15th century Burgundian portraits, that's that kind of black. It's like a 3-step dyeing process, and actually 3 different kinds of dye baths. You start with a good red. The most expensive was with Kermes to get the deepest red, or madder, which is a root that was commonly available. Then from there, after that, and usually you have to do a couple of dye baths to get it a nice deep red. Then you do an over dye with woad. Again, a couple of dye baths to get maximum saturation. So that's super expensive. And then there's a third dye bath where you have some kind of tannin producing dye stuff in it, like oak galls, right? And then that is where you finally get that super deep black at the very end. So what that means is that it's just expensive. It's expensive in terms of materials. All of those dye baths are hot, so they're fuel. You need fuel for the fire that goes under the dye vats. You need a professional who can do that, who knows how to do that. Lots of time and labor to produce that really deep black. And then at the end of the day, the irony is that they also add to get the really fine black, the blackest of the blacks at the very end. They usually put iron in the dye bath, and the iron salts create the final stage of darkness because they oxidize the thing. And so you're literally rusting your fabric. And then that fabric, which looks this amazing, beautiful, deep black, so saturated, so much depth, that fabric will rot much more quickly than any other fabric. And that is why we have almost no black textiles from the Middle Ages. In fact, we can tell where black textiles were because if you have a textile that has multiple colors and there's this random part of the pattern missing, it's probably because that was where it was black. Banners that have fringe along the edge, embroideries where there were black threads. Yeah, because the black has rotted away. Yeah, so irony of ironies, it's the most expensive, but it's also therefore the most delicate. So what would have been the most common? It's not about what would have been common. It was Ruth Quick. That's a good question. What would have been common changed with time. It changed with what was in fashion. What was possible, though, all the colors were possible all over Europe. All the colors were possible. And across all levels of society, there were cheap versions of almost every color. There was even a cheap black. Like I said, it wasn't a true black. It was more like a brown, and it would usually fade pretty quickly, but it's a black, right? Red, you could get red with a variety of cheaply available weeds. You could get yellow with a variety of cheaply available weeds, depending on where you were. There might have been a cheaply available plant that could produce a green. In Ireland, they had bracken, for instance. Nettle can also be used to produce a green. You can get green by doing a blue base and a yellow overdye, or a yellow base and a blue overdye, using woad or dyer's broom or weld. In Italy, in some parts of Italy, they did have indigo, although at certain places it was banned. In Florence, there's a period during which it was banned, and I'm not certain how far north indigo actually went. It was imported from India, so it was not a locally available commodity, whereas woad was a weed that grew everywhere. Yeah, in Europe anyway. You could get purple, again, by doing red and blue, red base blue over dye. Tyrian purple, by the way, ends in 1204, literally ends. There were apparently, in Ireland, they have some of their own whelks, Irish whelks that can be used to produce a Tyrian purple. But I have no evidence of that production happening past the first millennium. And Tyrian purple dies in 1204 because there's only workshops in Constantinople that actually do it. And when those feckle crusaders violate their oath to, not do any harm to fellow Christians, and they sack Constantinople, the Tyrian dyeing production centers basically shut down and they never come online again. So, yeah. Give me red onions every day. I do love red onions. Vidalia onions are also super cheap, super yummy. Oh, darn it. Show. Okay. Damn it. Okay. Twitchy says, darn it. Why is it doing that? Oh, I hate this so much sometimes. I hate the way this works. I hate the way it shows. If I touch the comment, it automatically shows it. Twitchy says, also what needs to be said is that wool also comes in different colors. That is absolutely true. Brown sheep wool would make black somewhat easier, but white sheep are more valuable because it can be dyed easier. Yeah, I was going to say the exception is sheep that have, brown sheep, and there are black sheep, although black sheep aren't truly black. They're actually just really dark brown. Yeah, but so you could actually get an easier black from wool, but there weren't as many brown sheep or / black sheep. And that definitely didn't help you with your silk problem of making silk black. But yeah, the problem with brown wool is that it's not really truly black. But yeah, so that actually brings up the point. So in first millennium Ireland, apparently, according to the Brehon laws, it was actually slaves in that time were only supposed to wear black or white wool, right? And so some people point to me and say, well, look, the slaves were wearing black wool. I'm going to bet it wasn't black. It was the wool from brown sheep, right? And that's why the slaves were supposed to wear it, because it was the least expensive, least processed wool. Same thing for white. White is not white. White was probably just the natural color of wool, minimal processing. There's a problem with using adjectives in that what we think of as being, when we think of that adjective, just because we have an idea of what black is, doesn't mean that the person using the word black 1500 years ago had that same concept of black. So there's actually some theories that our eyes may have changed, so we're actually perceiving colors differently now than we did 1500 years ago. I haven't actually looked into the science behind that, but that's a rumor I have heard floating around. Oh, Laurie, bonne nuit, bonne nuit. I think you would be able to make a good coloring from goldenrod, a beautiful yellow color. Jim O'Neill, yes, goldenrod can absolutely be used to dye fabric. However, goldenrod was not available in medieval Europe. It's a North American thing. But someone actually just recently asked me about goldenrod because they have a lot of goldenrod around them. Yes, goldenrod can absolutely be used to achieve a pretty decent yellow. 100%. In the Middle Ages, weld was the most common. And it apparently produced the best yellow. A lot of people want to say, well, what about saffron? Well, saffron doesn't seem to have been used very much in dyeing, not nearly as much as we like to think it is. And certainly in Ireland, not before the 14th century, as far as we can tell. It takes a lot of saffron to dye fabric a bright yellow. So that would have been crazy expensive versus weld, which is a weed and grows everywhere. Let's see, what was the most common fabric they used in medieval times? Cotton, linen, or others? So if you mean Europe, when you say medieval times, cotton was not a fabric that was used almost at all. It's not a fiber that was woven into fabric anyway. There was cotton in medieval Europe. There was a whole cotton industry, but the cotton was either woven half and half with linen to make fustian, or it was used for stuffing garments for padding. Right. The most common fabrics were linen and wool, hands down. After that, silk. The average person would have had a linen undershirt like the one that I'm wearing, and then over top of that, they would have over top of that, they would have worn another garment, either made of wool if they were on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, or of silk. So many queens, princesses, countess, duchesses had a kirtle like this undergarment made of very rich fabrics indeed in the 15th century. Silk damask, silk satin, plain silk, right? Silk was a very common choice. Even some cloth of gold coats in the case of queens. So yeah. So linen, cotton, and wool are linen, silk, and wool are the most common fibers in medieval Europe. In the South, they also used hemp. So around the Mediterranean, they actually had hemp fabric, they had hemp fibers, they had hemp yarn, they used hemp, they used hemp to make finger loop braiding, the laces for garments. But there was apparently some kind of weird bias against hemp in north of the Alps. I haven't been able to pinpoint why, but it might be the usual North Europe versus South Europe thing of the people in the Mediterranean being somehow not as sophisticated. I don't know. I'd have to look into that. But for some reason, there was a bias against using hemp in the northern half of Europe, whereas in the Mediterranean, they were still using it. Especially for practical garments, for interlining garments, for lining garments, not necessarily as a top fabric, but as a liner and an interliner, they were using hemp in medieval Europe. Oh, jetzt klar. Thank you. That's very lovely of you. Sponges, nightall. Susan, did you really mean to say sponges? Asking for a friend? Oh, goodness. So I am off to an adventure in Thailand. Be gone for 10 days. I will still be live streaming from Thailand. We're going to actually, because it's warm and humid outside, we're going to hopefully be doing some live stream dancing from some pretty interesting historic spaces in Thailand. Maybe live streaming some dance practices, that kind of thing. I will be doing medieval story time from Thailand, and we'll do at least one medieval sewing party from Thailand. On the travel side, if you're interested in our actual travels through and around Thailand, we're going to be hitting lots of historic sites and doing lots of handcrafty kind of things. And I'm going to be streaming all of that for my travels with the Creative Contessa channel, if you're interested in following the travel side of my creative endeavors. YouTube kind of punishes me if I don't stay in a lane, right? So I can't really publish my travel stuff on this channel, and yeah, it's silly, but there it is. Yeah, jetzt klar, herzlichen Dank. I really appreciate that. See if I missed any comments. Okay. Yep, twitchy, exactly. It's not just the dye, it's the availability of the sheep. Okay. There was a question about, a question about how people cleaned their homes in the Middle Ages. So housekeeping was very important. Being clean was important. Keeping things sweet smelling was important. I have not actually, I've seen brooms. They absolutely had brooms, and homes were swept on a regular basis. And fresh herbs were sprinkled about. I actually am not certain of the rhythm of that. I have not seen proof positive of the rhythm of cleaning a home in the Middle Ages. I'm going to assume, however, that like the modern world, the frequency with which you cleaned your home depended on the number of people who occupied your household, and perhaps the number of animals who lived in your household. So that's going to send me down. I think that's going to be my next exploration, is to find more evidence about how people kept their homes clean. Lots of depictions of people sweeping homes out with brooms, brooms that looked not really like modern, not like the modern ones that you see these days. They looked, unfortunately, more like what people call witches' brooms. Those were brooms. Those were just brooms. Just regular old brooms, right? And we do know that I know how kitchens were cleaned. Kitchens were scrubbed, counters were scrubbed with salt. Usually, very often, they would, after use, they would scrub down all of the kitchen equipment, all of the ladles and the dishes and the pots would be also scrubbed with salt, and then they would be put out in the sun to dry if there was sun. Obviously, if you live in the Arctic Circle, you just put them out to freeze, I guess. I don't know, in the winter time. So I'm definitely going to be looking into more about about cleaning. I have not found any evidence of mopping. Now, again, I'm not saying that it wasn't done. I just haven't found the evidence yet. So this is a question that's going to send me down a bit of a rabbit hole, I'm pretty certain. Yeah. And then let me see. Oh, dye stuffs. Back to the topic of dye stuffs. I have a bunch of people who say it was only the rich who could afford dyed clothes. And this is where I'm going to say that, again, I will reemphasize this. Dye stuffs came in an array of price points, from weeds that grew everywhere to super expensive imported from Italy, because or from Poland. There was a Polish louse also, Polish cochineal, right? So you know, everyone, only the poorest of the poor probably couldn't dye their own fabric, but they were getting either secondhand cast-offs, or they were being bequeathed clothing, as you know, when some wealthy person would pass on. So everyone had clothes of color, unless they specifically didn't want them for religious reasons or for ceremonial reasons. Dye stuffs were not so expensive that you know, they didn't price everyone out of the market. Now, super saturated colors, absolutely, definitely more expensive, no argument, right? Your average average, you know, person in the lower third of society probably couldn't afford a kirtle this deep of a blue, because this deep of a blue would have taken multiple dye baths to achieve. More expensive, right? But a light blue or a medium blue, sure, why not? So yeah. Don't Cap, you just now discovered my travel channel. Yeah, so travel and creativity for me go hand in hand, because traveling is one of the things that inspires my creativity. It inspires me to try new foods, to try new techniques, to learn new arts, to learn new history. So yeah, travel and history for me, they go hand in hand. So my travel channel has a lot of cultural and history stuff. There's also reviews about hotels and flights and tips on what to avoid so you don't make my mistakes. Okay, this is looking good. I think I've got all of these ones, all of the repairs on these kerchiefs all done. So I'm basically repairing one of these. Okay, next item on my list of questions that I gleaned from the comments. Oh, so I've seen the word bard get abused a little bit. Bards, some of you have referred to my Kondo Tiro when he's playing a lute as a bard. Not a bard. A bard is a storyteller. A bard is a person who tells stories, not just a musician. Bard is not synonym for a musician. Bards don't even have to play an instrument. They could just sing. They could just sing the tales or tell the tales with no musical accompaniment. So a bard is a storyteller. Bard is not synonymous for musician. So a bardic circle technically should only be a storytelling place. It shouldn't be a place where just music is played. So minstrel is a word for someone who plays music, or musician, or in many languages, you wouldn't refer to them as a general musician. You might call them a minstrel, but you generally refer to the person by the instrument that they play. So you call them a piper or a harper, a piper or a harper or a drummer or something like that. Were they made from thatch? Jim, are you talking about brooms? There seems to be a lag in when I say things and questions come in. If you're talking about brooms, brooms were made from a variety of things depending on where you were in Europe. I'm not certain if they were made for thatch or not. I would assume that you can make a broom from thatch, actually. Of course, in the US, we have broom corn, I think it's called, and that's not necessarily what they would have had in the Middle Ages. Yeah, they would have been. They had. I have seen depictions of brooms from the Middle Ages that have bristles of varying thicknesses, from relatively fine to the kind of broom that you would probably only use to, say, brush out your oven, where you're not necessarily so concerned about getting every speck of dust out. You just want to get the big chunks out. Okay, and then, yeah, I actually got through all of the things I went. Oh, the difference between ramie and linen and hemp. Oh, darn it. Sorry about that. Some of you have been asking me about the difference between ramie and linen and hemp. Yeah, so linen, they are all plants, and you're making them all from the stalk part of the plant. Linen is flax, so it's one kind of plant. Ramie is a kind of nettle, and hemp is it's another kind of plant, right? And so the properties are, honestly, I would say hemp is the most durable of them. It tends to spin up and then be woven up more thickly. Ramie can be woven very, very, very finely and has a natural sheen to it. Ramie is gorgeous. Ramie is the fabric par excellence here in Korea of the traditional fabrics, and it is really well woven. Ramie is, oh my God, chef's kiss perfection. Amazing stuff. You can't get the good historical stuff anymore though, because it's only cheap crap coming out of China. All of them are cellulose-based fibers. Plant fibers. They are all extremely good at evaporative cooling. I would actually say that ramie might actually be better at evaporative cooling than linen is, but it's close. Hemp is the hardest wearing of them. It definitely has the most durability of the three plant fibers. So in terms of fineness, you've got hemp, linen, and then ramie. And I know that we think that maybe they had this amazing magical ability to finely weave linen in the Middle Ages. You get those veils in the 15th century that are translucent, but that might not have been linen, that might have been silk. Whereas with ramie, you can weave ramie, you can even get to this day ramie that is amazingly finely woven.
And also how they take dyes was part of the question.
Oh, how they take dyes. Linen is very hard to dye. So yeah, depends on the dye stuff, right? Cellulose is generally harder to dye than animal-based fibers. They all take dyes, as far as I know, the same way. They're all cellulose. They're all harder to dye than silk. There are some dye stuffs that they will naturally absorb better than others. Chemical dye stuffs have made that point moot, of course. Yellows and blues. Linen, hemp, and ramie all take yellows and blues pretty easily. They don't retain reds very well. Naturally, they fade very quickly. You have to do a lot more. It takes a lot more and a lot more dyeing and over dyeing to get them to achieve a deep red by natural dyes. I haven't experimented with all of that's what I've read. I've experimented dyeing with linen. I have not experimented dyeing with ramie or dyeing with hemp, but that's what I've read about them. Nope, definitely don't do that. Okay. Yep. Okay, let's see where I am on my repairs. So I have kerchief 1 repaired, kerchief 2 repaired, and then I have smocks to repair. So smocks, for those who are just joining, are this linen overgarment against the skin. And yeah, these also, just like my kerchiefs, they wear out pretty quickly. So yeah. I was also going to talk about the failure of my recent medieval cooking party. Did any of you watch my medieval cooking party on recreating a so-called cherry cheesecake from 15th century Italy? Maybe some of you saw the post in which we posted our very lamentable results. It did not turn out well at all. It was just very sad. The combination of and I honestly, I'll be perfectly frank, I had misgivings about using the Parmesan cheese in combination with the sheep's milk cream cheese, but my cow milk fresh cheese was not done yet, and I had to press ahead. So I was hoping that some kind of magic chemical reaction would make it palatable. It did not. It was gross. It honestly, the combination of the sheep's milk cream cheese plus the nutty deep umami of the super aged Parmesan cheese, it tasted like something that had already been rejected by his stomach. It was unappealing. And it's very sad because we had to throw it away because neither of us could eat it. We could not stomach it in a literal sense of that word. And unfortunately, that means about $7 US worth of cherries were thrown out. A whole bunch of expensive cheese was thrown out. Organic eggs were thrown out. Or Kerrygold butter was thrown out because of the crust that also was thrown out. It was just very sad, but it was a learning experience. I was hoping that something would happen to make those flavors meld, and it did not. The other interesting thing to note is that the rose flavor was definitely not strong enough. So definitely needed a higher ratio of roses. And the cherry flavor was almost not even cherry flavored. It was just sort of acidic. That's probably because modern cherries honestly aren't the most flavorful. These cherries were big and watery, and that is nothing like medieval cherries. Medieval cherries would not have been big and watery. They probably weren't even that big. And they would have definitely had a much more intense flavor. So when cherry season comes here, when it's actually cherry blossom season and we actually have cherries, I'm thinking of going out with a basket and just collecting. Do I really want to do this? Collecting all of those wild cherries and grinding the pit out of them, or somehow straining the pit out of them. The unfortunate thing of the wild ones is that they're tiny, but the pits are big. So there's just very little flesh around the pit, but it's a much stronger flavor. So I will have to consider how much I want to put myself through that level of torture. But yeah, unfortunately, wherever I happen to be, I don't often have access to heirloom cultivars of anything, let alone cherries. So I did see the post. It looked like a cherry pie. It did not taste like a cherry pie. It tasted not good. It tasted really not good. I mean, yeah, Twitchy says you need to get them in season for good cherries. I'll be honest though, even if you go in season for a lot of fruit these days, it's just not good anymore. It's bred for size, which means it's bred to be watery mostly. So yeah, it's just kind of sad. It makes me sad. But at the very least, I can retry the experiment with not Parmesan cheese and not sheep's milk fresh cheese. So I'll be trying it again. I'm getting access to the Italian parts of that 15th century cheese manual that I mentioned. You may have heard me talk about it a bunch now. I've discovered a 15th century cheese travel vlog. And I mean, a book written in the 15th century by a man who lived in the 15th century, who was sent out by the Duke of Savoy to go and explore cheeses around Europe. and he wrote about his experiences, and he actually describes the texture and the flavor. I have a friend, a follower, a devoted follower, Kyle, who is in England, and he lives in the Greater London area, and he was able to go to the Wellcome, I don't know if that's how that's pronounced, the Wellcome Library, which has a copy of the German translation of that book. And he took some pictures, and he's going to go back. He says in the next month he's going to go back and he's going to take more pictures for me of the sections that talk about the Italian cheeses. But this cheese manual also talks about the production of cheese, how to make cheese, how to make butter, how it should taste, what kind of fodder you should be giving your animals to achieve your cows and your sheep and your goats to achieve the best flavored cheese and butter. And it really does describe the texture and the flavor. In the description for brie, the pages I've already been sent included French cheeses. In the section for brie, it actually talks about brie in exactly the way I know and love brie to this day. It talks about it being buttery and creamy, that it melts relatively easily, but it still is solid enough to sort of stand on its own, that it doesn't form long threads, Faden. It doesn't form, it's not stringy, right? And he talks about how the color, he actually says it starts off white, and over time as it ages, the rind turns yellow, and then over time, the yellow sort of spreads towards the inside, and that's the sign that it's ready. I was like, oh my God, and the flavor, he described it as nutty and lightly pungent, but not overpowering or something like that. So it sounds like, based on his description, like brie cheese in the 15th century is the brie cheese that we now know and love. So I'm really excited to get the German translation of this book. There is no English translation, none, not a single one. There is a German translation. Happily, I'm fluent in German, so no problem. Yeah, there's a German translation that was published in 2002. The German translation is sadly out of print, and I think I found a copy for $500. That's how rare this book is. Yeah. I know the pain. I tried to invent my own homemade hamburger helper, which ended up being repulsive enough to remove armor off of a battleship. Yeah, sometimes cooking just goes super duper bad. Am I the only person who likes the rind of the brie? I know a lot of people who cut the rind away and don't eat it. I love the rind. I love the texture of the rind. I like its flavor. I like its texture. It gives it substance. I think anyway. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the crazy one. Who knows? So I'm excited to see what the rest of this book has to say. I'm really excited to see what he has to say about the making of butter, right? If there's any kind of steps that maybe show that they were doing something different, right? Like it's just exciting to find primary source evidence of this kind of thing, rather than just assuming, well, making butter is making butter and it's always been that way. You know, I prefer to find actual evidence rather than making those kinds of desperate assumptions. And I eat the rind, too much work to remove it. I mean, there's that too, right? Unfortunately, soft cheeses don't agree with me, only hard-aged cheese. Twitchy, is it a lactose thing or is it the texture? I have a lot of friends who are lactose intolerant and they definitely can't handle the soft cheeses. It has to be hard and aged, especially the aged part. Let's see. There's seams that have burst on this thing. No, the seams haven't burst. The threads literally just wear away. They just do, especially in the high traffic areas, like sleeves, like the armpits, because I'm always doing this. Oh, that is unfortunate. Brie is a very nice cheese. I like Camembert a bit more than Brie, because it's a little firmer yet again. And has a little bit more of a tangier flavor than Brie does, I feel like. But I do love baked Brie, and I love Brie with vegetables. So I'm so sorry, Twitchy. Felicia, how many languages do you know? I have, at stages of my life, been fluent in 5 languages: Spanish, French, German, English, and Italian. Currently, my Italian and Spanish and French are rusty for casual speaking, My pronunciation is still fine, and reading is still fine, but I just don't get to speak them that often these days. My German is still good because I lived in Germany for 12 years, so it's the most deeply seated of my foreign languages. Obviously, English is my native language, and I speak Korean like a 4-year-old, but I do actually have a decent amount of listening comprehension in Korean. Yeah. I made butter in kindergarten in baby food jars. Yep, there's the jar method, right? You just put the cream in a container, put the lid on and shake the heck out of it, and then squeeze the water out, and there you have butter. But it will be interesting to see if there's anything more than that in this description. Does it talk about culturing the butter, for instance? Does it talk about, does it talk about technique? Does it talk about equipment? All of those kinds of things. Does it give you tips for how to make it so that your butter doesn't spoil, for instance? Add lots of salt, or make sure that you've cleaned all your implements first, right? There's all those little details that are more than just how to do it. Twitchy says, I make up for it with plenty of halloumi and melted cheese. Oh, halloumi, man. I love halloumi. I like to fry my halloumi so it gets just lightly brown and a little bit of a crispy layer on both sides. And then, of course, I really enjoy eating it with sun-dried tomatoes. I love halloumi. God, halloumi is proof that God loves us. It really is. I've got a bunch of halloumi in my fridge at the moment. I love almost all cheeses, old and young, brie and feta cheese, etc. Yeah, don't cap. There are very few cheeses that I have encountered that I don't like. I will admit, I do not care for blue or green cheeses on their own. I just don't. It's too much. I do like blue or green cheeses like as part of a salad or a sauce. That's fine, but I don't like eating it just on crackers or something like that. Don't care for it at all. Nope, not my thing, which is why I'm always disappointed when I fly in business class. You want to hear some privilege? You're about to hear some real privilege. That's why I'm always disappointed when I fly in business class and then they bring me the cheese tray as my 5th course and it has blue cheese on it. Oh, I crack myself up. Yeah, I did hear the privilege. Really, I did. I totally heard the privilege pouring out of my mouth. But my point remains, I don't care for green or blue cheese, any of the moldy vein cheeses on their own. I like them in a sauce or as a topping on a salad or something where it's not the prime flavor. Oh, shellback bow. Halloumi is, it's a cheese that's in texture. It's a little bit like mozzarella cheese, but it's usually made from goat and or sheep's milk, and you slice it and you fry it. So it's a grilled cheese, a cheese that you can grill. It's Greek. It's a Greek cheese. It's super yummy. It's higher in protein than fat. So it's high protein, low fat, relatively speaking, which gives it a little bit of it has a nice chew to it. It's al dente. It's very al dente. Have you ever had pickled watermelon rind? It's very good. Yes, I have absolutely had pickled watermelon rind, and it is very good. And I've had pickled watermelon rind not just in the US. I've had it in parts of Asia. Yeah, shellback bow. Look for halloumi. Do you have Costco's in Korea or Japan? If you have a Costco, the Costco in Korea sells halloumi sometimes. Let's see. Costume Cornelia. Hello, lovely Contessa for 15th century Italian. How did they pronounce the camicia, gamora, and giornea? Okay. So 15th century Italian is not one language. There are different dialects. So I actually am not an expert in the pronunciation of 15th century Italian. I know the modern pronunciation rules. I don't know how different they were in the 15th century. I don't know, and I definitely don't know the difference in pronunciation between Venice or Venezia or Bologna or Firenze, right? I can tell you that in modern Italian, it would be pronounced camicia, gamora, and giornea. So yeah, anytime you have that I after a C or a G in Italian, the I is not pronounced. The I softens that sound, the consonant that precedes it. So it's not camicia, it's camicia. Without the I, it would just be camica, right? It's not giornea, it's giornea. Without giornea, without the I, it would be gornea. Yeah, Twitchy Witch says, as she says, halloumi does squeak when you eat it. That is 100% true. Yeah, shellback bow, the commissary does sometimes have halloumi as well. Depends on your commissary, obviously. Yeah, but their cheeses are astronomically priced, and I've seen Costco is a much better option for cheese in Asia than the commissary is. How sad is that? Yeah, hey, Costume Cornelia, I didn't either until I finally took Italian. So there's my earliest getting dressed video, the Italian one, I mispronounce a couple of words pretty badly because I'm using Spanish pronunciation rules instead of proper Italian ones, so it's real bad. Yeah. Okay, let's see, anything else here? So, progress on my my not a hennin, my miter or turret, as it would have been called. It's coming along very well. It's the base turret is almost done. All I have to do is whip stitch the top and it's done. Now what I still have to make a new fillet, the band that goes around the sort of right up here around the head and around the base of the skull that has that loop. I have to make a new one that will fit better underneath of this turret. And now I have to get around to making the elaborate cover that I said I was going to make to go over top of the black silk that is currently there. So that's all still in process, basically. The new Burgundian gown, the new black gown that should go over top of this one. I have finished all of basting all of the interlining into the bodice, or the lining into the bodice. And I have pinned together the two back panels. We are ready to start, but I'm ready to move on to doing the long seams. As I mentioned, I'm doing the long seams by machine because I don't have time to hand sew all the long seams anymore. I've got to up my production by Penzic. So I just have to machine sew the long seams and then machine sew all the internal seams basically. And then I'll be able to do the interfacing and work on the collar, the detachable collar, which will be silk velvet. And the collar will be the exact same silk velvet as this for the Burgundian gown. So the cuffs and the collar will match. So making good progress. Making good progress. Smoked Gouda is smoked is Gouda for you? Shellback, I feel like something happened maybe to what you typed. I'm not certain. Smoked is Gouda for you. I'm not certain if this is a Yoda moment or if you were making a pun on the discussion of Gouda cheese. Gouda cheese is all right. Gouda is a city not far from me where it originates in the Netherlands. Yeah, Gouda cheese, it's okay. Yeah, it's all right. It's all right. I agree with that statement. I prefer a harder, more aged Gouda to a fresher Gouda. I like it to have more tooth. It's okay. But what we don't know, and here's the thing. So Gouda, what?
Smoked is Gouda for you.
Oh, Jesus.
That's what she was saying. Smoked is Gouda for you.
Oh, okay.
It's funny. It's a joke. I got it.
Okay.
I got it.
Okay, Shellback Bow. Ryan got it. Unfortunately, in the words, there's no intonation on the screen. So you don't cup, you may or may not know this. You're in the Netherlands. Got it, right. You may or may not know this, but Gouda was known for cheese, not because of the cheese that was made there, but because it was a cheese market. It was a major cheese market. Big cheese market. And it wasn't for the cheese itself. We actually I can't document Gouda cheese back to the Middle Ages, the actual cheese itself. The earliest I've been able to document the actual cheese that we understand now as Gouda to the 17th century. So you might say, well, of course they had it, but no, you can't assume that. Cheddar cheese, as we understand cheddar cheese, is not medieval. It's the result of a cheese-making process that was invented in the 18th century. So never assume that the cheeses that we know and love have just always been around because cheese. So yeah, I try never to assume. And just because something is called cheddar cheese in the 14th century, for instance, doesn't perforce mean that is the same cheddar cheese that we now know and love. Words often get recycled and applied to different things. I'll give you a prime example of that: pepper, right? Have you ever wondered why the thing that we grind up and sprinkle on our food that's generally black or green or gray or white, peppercorns, have the same word as pepper, like chili pepper, like bell pepper, right? They're not the same. They're not even vaguely the same plant. The word pepper already existed in the English language, and it just got applied extra to this newly introduced plant. That doesn't mean they're the same, though. So yeah, you can never assume that a word that is used for something in the 12th century has the exact same meaning that it now has, or it describes the exact same thing that it now does. So I try never, as a linguist and a professional translator, I appreciate that. I know that about language. So I try never to assume that things haven't changed. In fact, my go-to assumption is that things have changed, which is why I'm always pleasantly surprised when I find similarities. Yeah, I know. In America, everyone pronounces it Gouda, but I've been told by my Dutch friends anyway that the correct pronunciation is Gouda. Yeah. Although we have a Dutch person here. Don't cap. How do you pronounce that cheese from the city that's not far from your home, if you're still there? I mean, if it's a Dutch word, I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly. It is a Dutch word. Dutch is not one of my languages. Don't cap, have you been to the cheese market there so are you saying, when you say yes, I'm correct, Gouda is the correct pronunciation or Gouda is the correct pronunciation? Yeah, all of my American friends, of course, pronounce it Gouda, but I'm pretty certain I got corrected a bunch of times for calling it that when I was in the Netherlands. Yeah, so don't cap, have you been to that annual market? I enjoy markets in Europe. They're so much fun, especially those markets that have been happening for a very long time. Okay, well, while I wait to see the results of my question and see if the answer ever actually comes. I'm thirsty. I'm gonna have some tea. Okay, everyone. So we are coming up on our 3-hour mark. It's time for me to eat breakfast / lunch / first meal of the day, whatever that is. I am heading tomorrow. We are on the road tomorrow. Depending on how things go, we may or may not do a live stream crafting party from the lounge in Hanoi or not. But hypothetically, we're traveling all day tomorrow, so I probably won't be live streaming here. I will probably be doing some live streaming, maybe possibly for my travels with the Creative Contessa channel tomorrow. We're flying from Busan to Hanoi to Bangkok, then we're overnighting at Savunarbhumi Airport, and then on Monday morning, our time, we're taking a flight up to Chiang Mai, one of the capital of the Lana Kingdom. So I'm very excited to be in a warm and humid place with beautiful architecture, friendly people, very interesting handcrafts and foodstuffs, and lots of beautiful things to see and experience. Yeah. Oh yes, you say good. Yeah, okay. But the G is pronounced. But the OU is still ow, right? I know. Don't cap. I know what you mean by the Dutch G. It's a guttural G. Yeah. It's somewhere back here. I totally get that. But I was focusing on the vowel. Is it Uda or Ouda? Yeah. It's a glottal stop. You have a glottal. You have a guttural G sound in Dutch. I totally get that. I was more focused on whether it's Uda or Ouda. Yeah, the vowels. So I'd like to thank all of my members, all of my channel members, and my patrons on Patreon for supporting my work. I'd like to thank all of you who generously gave me super chats today. I really appreciate that. Thank you all who are just part of my community, and all of you who just come here and ask these great questions and share your own experiences and just have fun banter, as Philip likes to call it there in the live stream. If you had questions and I didn't get to them, pop them in the comments and hopefully I will see them. YouTube has been doing weird things to the comments lately though, but pop them in anyway. I will eventually see the comments and I will respond. If you are interested in supporting my work and you'd like access to extra content, as always, hours, dozens, if not hundreds of hours of extra footage, full tutorials, extra digital resources, access to my private Creative Contessa Discord server, then consider becoming a member or a patron on Patreon. Otherwise, everyone, I hope to see you all in Chiang Mai or in Bangkok in the coming days. Until next time, everyone, stay creative and have a wonderful weekend wherever you are in the world. Oh, thank you, Don't Cop. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Have a lovely time, everyone. Until then, bye.